Thanks for listening to The Gwart Show on the Blockspace Podcast Network. Subscribe to our newsletter at blockspace.media to get the show directly to your inbox. Show links, transcripts, and Bitcoin articles twice per week. Stay ahead of the conversation by visiting blockspace.media.
Okay, we're live. Actually, no, we're not live, but we're recording with Rijndael, who is a Bitcoin developer recently. I don't know. Have you recently come into the light more, or would you say that you've been around for a while? You can go ahead and introduce yourself. Rijndael works for the Taproot Wizards, and he is somebody who recently has been doing a lot of hacking on Bitcoin. And
Yep, that's right. So I'm at Taproot Wizards right now. My role there is I'm the CTO. My Twitter bio says artificer, which it's a Casey Rodomore word. It's like a wizard who imbues things with like magic, which I think like describes my job pretty well. I do my best to make Bitcoin transactions that are fun and magical and get people excited and interested in Bitcoin. I've been, we were talking a little bit before this. So I've been working full time in Bitcoin for a couple years now. Before Taproot Wizards, I was working on a non-custodial wallet project that involves a hardware signer, a back-end service that provides co-signing in the event of like recovery and for like convenience spends and some other stuff. Before that, I was doing some kind of side of desk, like hobbyist development for Bitcoin. But most of my career has been in large scale distributed systems, infrastructure management. So think like really, really big cloud infrastructure and not just deploying that, but like how do you manage consistency and availability of like large scale infrastructure across like lots of geographic regions. So did a lot of that work for a long time. Before that, my background was in like large scale network security and classical cryptography. So I got into Bitcoin many years ago because I had a background in like cryptography, not cryptocurrency, but like actual cryptography and distributed systems. And so when I saw Bitcoin, I thought this is cool. It's a way that you can use economic incentives to solve a distributed systems problem that we didn't know how to solve before. And I kind of understood the like the way that certain cryptographic assumptions were used in Bitcoin to provide the properties that it has. Spent most of my career outside of cryptocurrency, but working with applied cryptography and like some of the other building blocks that cryptocurrency networks are built on top of. And so when I decided to get more heavily into cryptocurrency, I was, much more familiar with the problem domain and like some of the other solutions in the space. And I think, part of what I've been able to bring to the table at Taproot Wizards and at previous, teams is that I have a lot of experience solving these kinds of problems in a way that's not encumbered by like the normal Bitcoin and Ethereum assumptions. And being able to like bring some of those solutions to this space, I think has been really useful. So I don't know. That's kind of a long and rambling intro.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. How did the Taproot Wizards snipe you? I think a lot of people in the, and I mean, I say this jokingly, but in all seriousness, I think a lot of people in the Bitcoin community have long respected your takes. And I think they also have long respected that you seem to know what you're talking about on the technical side, which has been perhaps some of the criticism of the Bitcoin community in the last few years, and obviously this is what Eric and Udi have been, I think, sort of trying to champion at this point. What was it about the Taproot Wizards? Did you feel like this was an opportunity for you? And yeah, like we can sort of start like, I wanted to ask you about NFTs in general as well, just because this is sort of like the primary project of Taproot Wizards right now. But we can just start like, what about Taproot Wizards was able to kind of captivate you?
Yeah, I mean, so I was really early to ordinals. I've been following Casey for a while now. He and I were on a Twitter space a couple of years ago where Fedimint, which is like a federated Chaumian eCash project. So Fedimint had raised a little bit of money from Blockstream for Eric Sirian, who's like the lead developer and maintainer of Fedimint, to be able to work on it full time. So I got on a Twitter space with a bunch of people, including Eric, to explain to people like what Chaumian eCash is and like why this project is interesting. And Casey was on that space, and I was like blown away by how like sharp he was and how much he knew, not just about Bitcoin, but about like the history of other cryptographic payment systems. And so I'd been following him for a while. I started playing with ordinals in the winter of 2022. He like wrote a blog post that described ordinals as being a way of doing like collectible Bitcoin. And that made a lot of sense to me. I had done a little bit of stuff with NFTs before, which like we can definitely talk about. It's kind of a fun story. But like it just became really obvious that, you know, there's people who online make their entire personality about Bitcoin. Like they collect Bitcoin t-shirts and posters and unique artwork and like all these things. It made so much sense to me that you would want to collect unique Bitcoin. Like maybe, you know, Bitcoin that was mined like when your kid was born or when you got married or from like the Binance hack or something. Like, you know, of course you'd want to collect collectible sats. So I started playing with Ord, contributed some very crappy code patches, and then I was playing with it when Casey was making inscriptions happen. And I actually made the first inscription on mainnet by somebody other than Casey. So Casey did inscription 0. I did inscription 1. I made inscription 1 be a dick butt for a whole bunch of reasons. Like the dick butt was the art. And so, you know, inscriptions was kind of popping off. I put the dick butt inscription on a Sats card, which is like a NFC card that you can use to hand around Bitcoin. And Eric Wall. So I made this dick butt inscription. Dennis Porto, who has like written a lot about different cultural things in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, wrote a really interesting blog post in January of last year about ordinals. And he really kind of predicted the controversy like very well. And I think Eric Wall read that blog post and then made a Twitter post saying, hey, like there's this underpriced block space on Bitcoin and we can make NFTs out of it. And somebody responded and was like, not only can somebody do that, but inscription number 1 is a dick butt. And I responded to that and said, yeah, and it's on this card. And Eric posted like that screen cap from American Psycho where he's looking at the business card along with a picture of a Trump NFT that he had. And he said, I want this and this. I'm not going to explain further. So I went and inscribed Eric's Trump NFT and put it on a Sats card and like sent him a picture of it. And a day or two later, he DM'd me and said, me and Udi want to do a thing. Can I like pull you into a Telegram group? And I said, sure. So I had never talked to Udi before that. Like this was my first interaction with like Eric, other than like, you know, trading replies on Twitter threads. So we all got in a group and they said, do you want to help us make a 4 megabyte single Bitcoin transaction? And like, I'm a Bitcoin developer. So the only correct answer is hell yes. So we like worked over the weekend to make the 4 megabyte Taproot Wizard. So we did that. And that was a lot of fun. And it was kind of a skateboard trick on the blockchain. And then after that, like 2 weeks later, we inscribed the bulk of the collection. So the other like 2,085 wizards we put on chain. And so I like wrote all the software to do that and kind of like did the rubber meets the road part of the inscriptions. And after we did that, we got together as kind of a group. Like team is maybe too loose, but like the group of us that were working on this got together, and Eric and Udi laid out this vision of, you know, we could just go and sell these and like make a quick buck, but you know, there's an opportunity here to say, you know, NFTs are very good at community building. And what if we kind of harness the community building power of NFTs and direct that at helping people become better Bitcoiners and like pushing Bitcoin culture forward. So we came up with this idea, and I say we, like the group came up with this idea of like, let's do the wizard quests. And so, quest 1 was like, you change your Twitter profile to have like a wizard in it. Quest 2 was you install a Lightning wallet and send $2 to the Human Rights Foundation. And then Quest 3 was like the wizard shower. And, the idea was like, we can give people incentives to interact with Bitcoin in ways that they like haven't done it before. So that happened. Taproot Wizards was kind of like a side of desk project for me for the next like 6 months or so. Like the team would message me and say, hey, we need help, inscribing this honorary or doing this thing. But, Udi and Eric and the rest of the kind of core team were mostly like running the Taproot Wizards effort. And a couple months ago, I was working full time on this like non-custodial wallet that's aimed at consumers. And I got into that project because I originally, when I was leaving my non-Bitcoin job behind, I wanted to start a company to do like non-custodial like sports betting on Bitcoin using discrete log contracts. And so I built a prototype to do like a Super Bowl bet. And a friend of mine who he's like a software developer, he works at NVIDIA, he knows how to use computers. It took him like 2 hours to pick out which Bitcoin wallet he was going to use. And I was like, this is insane. Like we have to make this easy. So I spent like 2 years working on really accessible non-custodial wallets, and thought I was going to be doing that for like a decade. And Udi came to me a couple months ago and said, I think we're going to try to like raise some money for Taproot Wizards, and we're going to like make this a real company. There's like more vision here, and there's more of the stuff that we've been talking about, because we had been talking kind of the whole time. And the thing that was exciting to me about the vision, like, this is all long rambling way of you said, like, what was the pitch? How did they snipe me? It was kind of two pieces. One of them is I had been working under this assumption that in order to get more people using Bitcoin for more things than just like you bury it in your backyard and you look at it once a year, like I think people need to actually use Bitcoin on a regular basis. In order to do that, we needed to start by making better, more accessible self-custody tooling, and then like the use cases would materialize. And this is something that in retrospect was like obviously untrue. Like, and it's really untrue to anybody who's ever done like product development. But for some reason, like that was the perspective that I had. And, watching the ordinals community in January of last year, if you wanted to trade ordinals, you had to set up a full Bitcoin node, compile the Ord wallet, which is like a Rust project, sync your node, and then you were doing like spreadsheet trading in Discord with a command line app. And people actually did it. Like they helped each other do it, and they stood it up. And then from there, we got like better wallets, and we started getting trustless marketplaces, and like the whole ecosystem blew up. And so it's really, really obvious that if you build the compelling use case and you can get people to kind of push through crappy UX to do that use case, then that's actually where you should be building. And so, the conversation that I had with Udi a couple of months ago was basically, if you look at what's happening in the ordinals ecosystem, it's a little microcosm, or it's a little terrarium-sized Bitcoin circular economy. Like 100% of the people in that ecosystem are holding their own keys. They are using Bitcoin as not just a store of value, but also a medium of exchange and a unit of account. And they're building non-custodial, trustless swap marketplaces using like PSBTs and like interesting wallet constructions. There's companies now that are doing like borrow lend markets using DLCs. Like all the things that people want for a future Bitcoinized world are all being built. It's just being built around JPEGs because speculation is the demand driver. And so it just really struck me that if we wanted to push sort of Bitcoin application tech forward, we needed to be able to do that in a market and an ecosystem where people were actually willing to use it. And Ordinal seems to be that spot. And then the other part of it was, just looking over the last year, I think the impact that Taproot Wizards specifically and the ordinal community broadly has had on Bitcoin culture has been really profound. And I think you see a lot of people who are either coming to Bitcoin for the first time or coming back to Bitcoin from other places, and they're finding a culture where they feel like they can be included and they can be part of the conversation. And I think that's like really exciting. So I think that, yeah, I mean, like there's just an opportunity here to make the Bitcoin culture like more inclusive and maybe bigger than it was before. And I think that there's also a real opportunity to build products and services that people actually want to use, that maybe some small percentage of them are also more useful generally to like a future Bitcoin economy. So like those two things, you know, put together were kind of the opportunity. I get to wear a wizard hat to work, and like that's a bonus, but you know, like trying to push Bitcoin forward is what I'm here for.
I want to ask you quickly, did your mind change about NFTs though? Like, so
yeah,
prior to, okay. Yeah. Like, did you, when they were elsewhere and when you were witnessing sort of the first explosion of JPEGs on these various blockchains, did you have sort of a cynical view and then you had your mind changed, would you say?
Yeah, I had a cynical view for a bunch of reasons. I mean, I think one of them, and I think some of my criticisms of NFTs on other blockchains, whether it's ETH or AVAX or Sol or whatever, like I think some of them are legitimate. And I think some of them are things I was wrong about. So, you know, look, you're trading a token that has a pointer to like an IPFS pin is like not good. And like that was one of my criticisms. I worked a little bit on a project to try to do more durable storage for NFTs at like a infrastructure provider, and you know, like that was a major concern in 2021, and I think that that's probably still a concern now. Like IPFS provides naming and delivery, but it doesn't provide durability or availability, and I think that that's something that like your average NFT consumer, I don't know. Probably now it's a lot more obvious, but I think like circa 2020, 2021, I think the median NFT enjoyer was probably confused about what things IPFS provided and what things it didn't. So like I thought that was a little bit gross. Generally, I kind of like my view of the world was, and to some extent still is, that I think you're going to end up with this like very bimodal distribution of NFTs over time. So it's going to be this very like bathtub shaped distribution, where on one end you have NFTs that function as Veblen goods, like they're expensive because they're expensive. It's things that are going to have crazy lasting cultural value, and they'll like maintain their value because they're expensive. And then at the other end of the distribution, I like my view of NFTs kind of before ordinals was really that the ultimate use case for NFTs is a tradable DRM token. So like you imagine that you have this NFT in your wallet, you go to some service or website, you log in with your wallet, and your possession of that NFT entitles you to some content or some level of access. So like the really primitive version of this is like people do token gated like Discords, right? But like I was working on a project at one point to do to actually tie like DRM entitlements. So imagine you have this like NFT in your wallet, you go to a site, and now you can like watch a movie or read a book or listen to music or whatever. If I send you that NFT and it removes my DRM entitlement and grants the DRM entitlement to you, then what I have is like the virtual representation of like a movie. And like I send it to you, and now it's your movie, and I can no longer watch it and you can watch it because it's just a transferable DRM entitlement. And so if that ends up being like the utility case for most NFTs, then I think eventually the market value for those things ends up being some small like collectible premium above whatever the market rate for that DRM entitlement would be. So if a movie is $9.99 and you can get like the collectible movie, maybe that's worth another $10. And so this NFT is $20 in like a fair market value. So like my view of the NFT market was like over time in the limit, you're going to have a very small number of like hyper valuable Veblen good collectibles that like it's your Bored Apes, and you you pay a lot of money because like Jimmy Fallon had one on TV. And then like the rest of them are sort of sold next to the counter at 7-Eleven for $10 or 99 cents or whatever. Like it's, people talk about like Fortnite skins as NFTs. I think the market value for NFT Fortnite skin is probably like 99 cents, right? So like that's going to be the bulk of them. I think the thing that is interesting about ordinals is because of the mechanics of Bitcoin, you're not going to do mass market like DRM entitlements on Bitcoin. So like that latter case can't really exist on Bitcoin in the way that we do ordinals now. Maybe there's some L2 that you can do, but like the way that we do them today, it just doesn't make sense economically. So I think the only reason to do ordinals on Bitcoin is for that kind of like Veblen good long-term like cultural impact thing. So I think we're going to have a lot of ordinals on Bitcoin that kind of go to zero, but you're going to have a small number where if they have cultural impact, then they're valuable long-term because they're scarce and they're on Bitcoin, like all the data is there. And, a thing that Udi said that really resonated with me was, if Bitcoin is digital gold, then these things are digital jewelry. And that like makes sense. Like the reason why, if you buy a $200,000 watch, it's not because there's $200,000 of precious metals in that watch. It's because there's a artificial scarcity around that watch, and you wear it as a form of conspicuous consumption to say like, hey, look, I can spend $200,000 on a timepiece that tells worse time than a $10 Casio. So, I think high-end NFTs are a similar thing. Like, if you spend 18 hours a day on social media and you make your PFP be a $100,000 NFT, then it's a form of conspicuous consumption. And like, that's what people are paying for. And, I think that the thing that I had gotten wrong, early and was interesting to see in the ordinals ecosystem was like when this was popping off, I spent a lot of time in Discords and Twitter explaining the exact mechanics of how ordinals work. And like, this is the thing that you're buying. Like you're not buying the image, you're buying a SAT that you're buying a UTXO that if you run this other software that provides this overlay on top of the Bitcoin transaction graph, it shows up in your wallet as an image. And I'd like very precisely explain this to people and they'd say, yep, I understand. Please take my money. And once I kind of understood like, no, these are like informed consumers that are doing this because they're speculating or they're trying to do conspicuous consumption, then a lot of my, misgivings about NFTs like disappeared and it like made sense.
A lot of Bitcoiners, maybe they still have reservations, but they've come around to the notion that these people are more or less aware of what they're buying. Like, and there's, and that is like, that's a big chasm to cross in many ways.
It's a huge chasm.
I think it's still reasonable for these people to have reservations. I mean, and I understand why they may still feel this way. And I also understand that they may not matter that much and people are going to do whatever anyway. So, but, okay. So I wanted to ask you, you did something kind of hilarious, which got some coverage, but you wrote this bot that, and tell me if I'll let you explain it, but you were essentially sniping tickers out of the mempool on these BRC20 tokens. So first I want to ask you, this was like, I thought this was pretty interesting. Certainly an example of MEV. I mean,
sure.
Eric loves talking about MEV on Bitcoin. And but this is certainly an example. But then also I wanted to ask maybe you can start with just your general view on BRC20s and the tokens on Bitcoin. And then also maybe this bot you wrote.
Yeah. I mean, man, BRC20, like I have such a love-hate relationship. So I think Domo, who's the creator of like the BRC20 standard, brilliant. And I think the thing that he did that is really obvious in retrospect, but I think was a really smart move, was building BRC20s in a way that have this like open mint mechanic. Without that, like, so for people who don't know, like the way that BRC20 works, like BRC20, okay, so I've said the nice things about BRC20. I think it's a horrible protocol. Like it's super inefficient and it's just kind of dumb. So the way that it works, and it's important to understand how this works, otherwise my bot makes no sense. So the way that this works is So you make an inscription. Okay. So inscriptions are like, you can put data on Bitcoin in a way that's like NFT flavored. And inscriptions take 2 on-chain transactions. You do what's called a commit and then a reveal, and then you can see the data. So you make an inscription with a little blob of JSON, and it probably should have been something other than JSON, but whatever, it's easy to parse. Little blob of JSON that says, I'm deploying a new coin. So you say, I want to make the Gwart coin, the max supply is 20 million. Every time somebody wants to mint one of these, they can make up to 1,000 of them. And here's like the precision, like it can be 8 decimal places or 18 if you want to do it like, Gwei or whatever you want to do. So you make this inscription that says, I'm deploying this contract, hand wave. And the thing that's important is that in that deploy message, there's a ticker for your coin. Tickers have to be 4 characters and they are globally unique. So the first deploy message for the GWAR coin like gets that ticker, and nobody else can claim that ticker ever again. And then what happens is anybody can make another inscription that says mint and says, I want to mint 1,000 GWAR tokens. And what happens is if you're running a BRC20 indexer, it looks at transactions that are made and then basically maintains like account balances. So it's putting an account system on top of Bitcoin. Now, one of the reasons why I think this is dumb, there's a bunch of them. One of them is the way that then you do transfers is, say that I have like 10,000 Gwar tokens and I want to send you one of them. I inscribe a transfer message and then I send you the transfer inscription, and then it updates both of our account balances. But once I've done that, once I've sent you that transfer inscription, that inscription is now not worth anything anymore. Like, so we're using inscriptions as like a data publication mechanism, but the token value isn't actually tied to the inscription. The inscription is just there to publish like an announcement of intent. And then the indexer has to parse that, apply some set of consensus rules, and then update account balances. So one of the effects of this is you have a lot of these inscriptions that are like spent messages that are sitting in people's wallets that have 0 value. And people make them really small. They make them dust sized. So they also usually have like no incentive to clean them up. So a lot of like the UTXO set increase that we've seen over the last year, and like the rate of that increase going vertical, is that there's a lot of incentive to create these messages, but then no incentive to actually consume those UTXOs, because it actually costs like more in fees than you're going to get back from like reclaiming those UTXOs. So that's like one problem. Another problem is, I said, if you want to make Gwart token and it has a token, a max supply of 20 million, and every time somebody mints it, they can make 1,000. That means that it's going to take, 20,000 inscriptions in order to like mint out the balance. Each inscription is 2 on-chain transactions. So if you deploy the Gwar token and like really publicize it, then it's going to result in 40,000 on-chain transactions to mint out the supply. That's before anybody's transferred it. That's before any trading. It's just like 40,000 inscriptions. And then because the limit enforcement is done at this like external indexer and it's not enforced by Bitcoin consensus rules, if there's a maximum of 40,000 of these transactions that are going to be valid for getting like a Gwar token drop, but there's high demand for it, there might be 100,000 transactions that try to get Gwar, but only the first 40,000 of them actually get it. So we saw this dynamic a lot last summer where there was like a vampire token. It was like VMPX that it took, an hour to mint out, but then it took 3 days for the mempool to clear out all of these other mint transactions that never actually resulted in tokens, but still bloated the UTXO set and still drove up fees. So that's BRC20. So what I did was I wrote a bot that looks in the mempool for any of these deploy messages. And so if it sees you're creating a token called Gwar, it would just copy the ticker and do a new token deployment with max issuance set to 1. and then it would jack up the fee. And so since this is a globally unique namespace, I would get the name and it would be a max supply of one. So I turned all these tokens into NFTs.
And so you did this sort of, I don't know, altruistically for a fun hack.
Well, actually, the reason why I did it was Casey was working on Runes, which is like an upcoming token protocol. And the original spec was first is first, globally unique names. And I said, don't do that because people are going to write bots to snipe names out of the mempool. And he said, like, I don't think anybody would do that. So I went and did it for BRC20.
That's awesome.
I killed 266 BRC20 tokens. And I said, like, look, like somebody's doing it.
Okay. So wait, let me ask you this. Could a miner have set it to the actual effective max balance or whatever,
yes, and
then just sniped it? So like in theory, one of these mining pools could have started front running the ticker symbols and then just scooping the supplies.
100%.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. What do you think about Runes? This is the Casey, the creator, founding father of inscriptions and ordinals. He's launching a new token protocol. It uses the actual UTXO set and as opposed to. So yeah, go ahead. What are your thoughts on Runes? And yeah,
I mean, it seems like a much better design protocol than BRC20. I think it's better designed for a couple of reasons. One of them is the token value actually follows Bitcoin UTXOs, which is good from a harm reduction perspective. Because like one of the things I really like about inscriptions is it's really obvious that Casey spent a lot of time thinking about how do you do NFTs on layer 1 Bitcoin in a way that minimizes the negative effects that kind of data publication would have on the layer 1 chain. So like with inscription specifically, the data goes in a portion of the transaction that actually never has to be validated. Like it doesn't add additional validation costs onto nodes. It's prunable. It's downloaded once, but then it doesn't go into the UTXO set. So it's like the least harmful way that you could do data publication on Bitcoin. And it's like very thoughtful. And so Runes is a similar thing where the value of the token actually is bound to UTXO. And when you want to transfer a Rune token, it actually consumes the UTXO and creates a new one. So, like what we want is for the size of the UTXO set to kind of grow roughly linearly with like the amount of actual like token balances in the system. Whereas with BRC20, you kind of have this like ratcheting effect of like, it'll always kind of increase, but it never really decreases unless people have extra incentive. So Runes is better from like a, being a good citizen like perspective. That's nice. The other thing that's really nice about it following the UTXO model is I haven't seen anybody actually do it or write it up, but I suspect that Runes is probably better suited to lift onto Bitcoin layer 2s. So if you wanted to be able to do like Runes over Lightning, it seems like you should be able to do that. If you wanted to be able to do Runes in like a state chain Mercury layer kind of thing, like you should be able to do that. Runes also, so like another thing that's tricky about BRC20s is because they have this account model that's like overlaid and depends on ordering. Like your BRC20 token balance depends not just on the state of your transactions, but actually like global state. Because if there's 10 tokens that can be issued and there's 20 transactions that happen, you have to look at order of block inclusion to see like which 10 are valid and say these other 10 are invalid. With Runes, you can validate the validity of a rune by looking at a particular UTXO and then following its ancestors backwards to see if it lands at like token issuance and then validating all of the transactions going forward. So that means that you could do things like have an SPV proof of your runes. Like if I have a light wallet, like a lightweight wallet that gets SPV proofs from like a full node, I could fetch a series of SPV proofs and then do a bunch of like validation on that and have like a high degree of assurance that my rune is actually mine and it's actually valid in a way that you can't with other token protocols. So I think that's really cool. Casey did the smart thing and built it so that you can do open minting with runes, which I think is important, because if you want to compete with BRC20 in the marketplace, you need to be able to compete at the killer feature. And like the killer feature of BRC20 is this like open minting mechanic. Yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think it's it has the potential to be really popular.
Hey, this is Will of Blockspace. We're a new Bitcoin publication covering the business of doing Bitcoin. Check out our newsletter by going to blockspace.media today, or listen to one of our other podcasts on the Blockspace Podcast Network, like Bitcoin Season 2 or The Mining Pod. Gain the edge you need to run your business or job by subscribing to our content today. Again, that's blockspace.media.
What are your overarching thoughts on tokens on Bitcoin? This is a pause. Actually, let me ask this another way. Do you delineate tokens with pictures versus tokens without pictures? Like, because this is something quite interesting to me. Like, it does seem that some people have drawn lines in the sand, and it's not immediately clear to me why sometimes. Like, and especially if, I guess maybe this is a bit of a cynical rationale, but like, if 99% of people are speculating on NFTs, and 99% of people are speculating on the tokens without JPEGs attached, like, functionally, it's like, are we trying to ascribe some like this is okay versus this is not? And this is what I've wondered just in general about, maybe more specifically with how Bitcoiners have looked at this, because I have seen some Bitcoiners have very strong conviction about NFTs and like loving the fact that there's NFTs, and then have very strong reservations about tokens and BRC20s. And I found it interesting. Like, is there some type of, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably like I'd say that my view is a little bit more nuanced than like NFTs good, tokens bad. If you had to flatten it to something, I'd say I'd probably flatten it to NFTs fine, most tokens bad. But like I'm still, it's something that I'm always reevaluating, and I think my rationale for it makes sense to me. I'll say this out loud and then like tell me if this makes sense. And like if I'm making some huge like logical fallacy, like I'd love the feedback. But okay, let's like start with the primary use case for everything in crypto is speculation. Like even Bitcoin, if you're like a hardcore like sound money, laser-eyed book of safety maximalist, and you say I buy Bitcoin because it's the hardest money and because I want to preserve my purchasing power over time. That's like a thing that people will say, like, unironically and just like dead serious. Even if that's your perspective, you are still speculating on the value of Bitcoin, because like preserving purchasing power means that it's going to be worth more in the future than it is today, or at least the same amount in like dollar denominated terms, right? And if you hold this view about Bitcoin, then you probably also hold the view that fiat is inevitably going to be debased down to zero. And so preserving your purchasing power necessarily means that Bitcoin has to go up in fiat denominated terms. Otherwise, like, what are you doing here? So most people are speculating on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. The only people who aren't using Bitcoin for speculation, in my view, are people who have like an actual medium of exchange, like marketplace reason. Like early days of Bitcoin, you bought Bitcoin because you wanted to buy drugs on the internet. You're not speculating on Bitcoin. You're buying, Molly on the internet, and this is like the only way. I had some friends that needed to get out of Ukraine when Russia came over the border, so we got them some Bitcoin. They traded it for a car and drove away. They didn't care about like the future value of the Bitcoin. They like, this was the only way to get money to them. So those use cases do exist, but I think those are the minority use cases in like 2024. So, okay, everything is speculation. Fine. I think that if you wanted to draw a distinction between speculation on NFTs and speculation on fungible tokens, a reasonable way or reason to draw that line would be, you could say all fungible tokens at the end of the day, they're they look like monies, right? Like you use them for different things, like Ethereum. The reason why you use it as money is because you can pay gas, and the theoretical future value is that the Ethereum blockchain is going to be a useful application platform for all these things. And so I speculate that by owning the gas token for it, like that will become more valuable in the future. With Bitcoin, there's like the scarcity bit, and then there's also like you have to pay Bitcoin transaction fees with Bitcoin. And so if the Bitcoin network is more useful for money in the future, then holding Bitcoin should like be more valuable in the future. NFTs are collectibles, right? Like you buy this thing and it's unique and it has a low number of items. And so you're saying like, oh yeah, there's only 50 of these. So I'm speculating that people want this collectible. I think that that's actually different from saying, I've got this fungible token. At the end of the day, the core use case for all of them is sending and receiving. So if you're speculating on monies, ultimately you want there to be like a small number of monies, because like the net value, utility value of a money is that like the more people accept your currency, the more valuable your currency is. So you don't want there to be 10,000 currencies. You want there to be like one or two, so that you don't have to like exchange in and out of different currency pairs whenever you want to buy a sandwich or whatever you want to do. So I think from like a purely self-serving, like maximizing your future value perspective, I think it's totally rational to say, I want my monies to be as few as possible, because I want there to be like one or two currencies that everybody uses to maximize interoperability. And then collectibles are collectibles. And like NFTs don't really compete for monetary interoperability against Bitcoin the way that like Ethereum or Sol or AVAX compete with Bitcoin, right? Like Ethereum, if you ignore the smart contract bit, Ethereum kind of like directly competes with Bitcoin. I don't think anybody would reasonably say like, oh yeah, in the future, you're going to buy your cup of coffee with your Bored Ape. Like that doesn't make sense. That's not what you buy it for. So I think that there is a rationale that you can draw to say, I am perfectly comfortable helping people speculate on collectibles, but I want the number of monies in the world to reduce. And so I don't want to be propagating more monies. I don't know if I buy that, but I think that that's like an argument that you could make reasonably.
No, I think I probably agree with you mainly. I will say, with that said, tokens now, especially, I mean, you have like, I would sort of delineate between L1 gas tokens maybe versus application tokens. A lot of application tokens now present themselves more like equities, or so they confer some rights. And this is what I'm sort of curious. I mean, is this something that you see potentially happening with Bitcoin protocols built atop? I mean, maybe there are some intricacies to the L1 of Bitcoin that make this a little bit more difficult, just maybe at the starting point of where I've kind of thought about this, like we're already far enough along without a lot of Turing completeness or expressivity and a lot of dexterity upon which to build. We may be in a good spot with Bitcoin in like sort of the base layer, preserving some of, I don't know, maybe the more monetary use case. But I am curious if you see these tokens ultimately evolving into something like, a Uni token or an Aave token, or like something that confers some type of rights that I don't think they're not saying we're going to go to the supermarket and buy groceries with Uni, but they are conferring sort of another type of right.
Yeah, I mean, like I think like the two. So for everything I just said, like take all that I just said and throw it in the trash, right? Because like or maybe put it to the side. I think there's like two carve outs that are kind of interesting. One of them is I think stable coins are actually kind of interesting. The question about like, do you do collateralized or do you try to do some like algorithmic thing is like a good question. But like at the end of the day, I still have to pay my bills in dollars. And so, one of the things that I think the Bitcoin ecosystem could benefit from is like, if more Bitcoiners looked at like Aave or something and said, how could we build that with better trust assumptions? It would be really nice as a Bitcoiner to be able to go and like borrow some fiat against my Bitcoin without handing it to a custodian. Like that's a useful thing if you believe that Bitcoin should only be money. And then the other class of tokens that I think might have some, I'll call it legitimate utility, to separate it from saying like, oh yeah, we're going to issue a token and it's like a governance token, but it's a governance token that doesn't actually control anything. You just get to like vote on what our intern puts on the Twitter account, which is what a lot of these end up being. I think that there actually have been some interesting tokens that have been used where like at the end of the day, the utility of it is to over collateralize bonds for trusted roles, where if somebody in that trusted role abuses their power, it drives down the value of their bond. And so they have economic incentive to act correctly. So like two really good examples of this. One of them kind of outside of Bitcoin is like Thorchain like manages its Bitcoin wallet, right? By having like, for people that don't know, like Thorchain is this L1 for basically doing it's kind of like a DEX between different L1s. So if you want to swap like Bitcoin for ETH, you can like do it on Thorchain. And the way that works is, they've got to have a big wallet full of Bitcoin. And like, how do you make sure people don't just abscond with the Bitcoin? And the way that they do it is that wallet is like a 40-person threshold multi-sig using like MPC, and all of the signers have to put up a bond of rune token. This isn't like Casey's runes, but this is like another rune token that that's like more than the value of the Bitcoin. And rune is only valuable to use for exchange fees on Thorchain. So if they like run away with all the Bitcoin, then nobody uses Thorchain anymore, and they just lit all of that rune on fire. That rune is worth more than the Bitcoin, so they have like economic incentive. There's a similar thing in the pure Bitcoin ecosystem that most like hardcore Bitcoiners actually don't know exists, which is in the BISC exchange. So BISC is a super based peer-to-peer exchange for Bitcoin. So if you want to buy Bitcoin with like cash by mail, you can literally do that on BISC. You can like mail somebody a bag of cash on BISC and get Bitcoin. And there's a bunch of trusted roles in the BISC protocol where there's like arbitrators for mediating trade disputes. There's like the person who owns the DNS domain. There's the person who runs the Twitter. There's like the people who own the GitHub. If those people were malicious, they could cause a lot of damage to BISC, and they could like steal a lot of money. So the way that BISC manages that is they have a colored coin called BSQ, and the only utility for BSQ is paying BISC transaction fees. So if you want to be in like a trusted role in BISC, you have to buy a bunch of BSQ from the marketplace and post that in a bond. And then there's a BISC DAO that can vote to slash your bond. So if you're like the guy who's running the BISC Twitter and you start abusing that power, then they can like light your stake on fire. And it's a way that they can provide like economic security. So I think, with Bitcoin, as people are working on new L2s, I think a lot of the new protocols that people come out with on Bitcoin are ultimately going to reduce down to like multi-sigs. Like they're basically going to be like multi-sig security models. And so if you need to have crypto economic trust that those signers aren't all going to collude and steal the bag, you have to have them be able to lose something that's more valuable than the bag that they're signing for. And one way to create that is by having a token whose value isn't tied to Bitcoin directly, but is tied to your layer 2. And I think that that's like a model that a lot of Bitcoiners are uncomfortable with. But unless we get, way more expressivity in Bitcoin, I think that that's going to be the best that we can do.
Interesting. Well, that's a good segue into layer 2 development. I talked to Eric first podcast, and he is.
It was a good episode. I really liked it.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. So obviously he's been in the weeds on rollups recently. There's been a lot of talk about rollups. I see you still hacking around with Lightning, talking about space chains, talking about a lot of these. It's interesting. I want to hear your views on rollups, and we go from there.
I mean, rollups are interesting. I'm really interested in rollups more. Okay. I don't think the final ultimate solution for scaling on Bitcoin, whether it's just like scaling throughput or scaling expressivity, is going to be exactly like what we have with rollups and other ecosystems, for a bunch of reasons. Like one of them is just the amount of like just the amount of state that would have to go on chain, like every block or every 6 hours, or like, however you want to design your system. Like Bitcoin is going to have small blocks for the foreseeable future. I don't think you're going to have all the state beyond Bitcoin forever. Like I think the only way that Bitcoin scales is to get state off of the main chain. I think a lot of the work that's been done on Starks and better Snarks to enable rollups is actually the interesting thing. And I think what's going to be really interesting is whether it's Validiums or other constructions where you're like posting proofs onto L1 and being able to validate those proofs on L1, but you put data availability somewhere else, I think is ultimately like where we're going to want to end up. Like, I think if you had something where it's like, you and your 1,000 closest friends are sharing a UTXO and there's some proof of publication ledger a la state chains to make sure that sort of, when you have like soft finality between like proof data actually being published somewhere, to make sure there's not like double spending happening kind of at those like soft finality checkpoints. What would be great is if you end up in a situation where like the happy path is you have these like really minimal scripts that just sort of post proofs every however often. If you want to get coins in and out of these constructions, you have marketplaces where people can do kind of atomic swaps between like Lightning and these coin pools, or between like L1 and these like coin pools. And, if you have to do the unilateral withdrawal, then you're posting giant proofs and witness data, and like that's all fine. But I don't think you're going to want to put all of like the proof witnesses in, every Bitcoin block or something. Cause I think it just like limits how many accounts or how many virtual UTXOs or whatever it is you can actually support the chain. I think, Lightning, I'm not super bullish on Lightning for end users. I think Lightning as settlement between other L2s or as settlement between other like always online entities makes a lot of sense. But I think that there's probably a lot of lessons that we can draw from Lightning about like, how do we do state management between like pairs of people offline in a way that's reasonably decentralized. I think is like interesting. I think that there's like a whole design space for how do we do multi-party like state publishing and reconciliation that a lot of people have just sidestepped because they say, okay, we're going to publish all the data to ETH L1, and then like when that gets too full, we'll just like throw it over the wall to some other blockchain. I think people have like avoided that problem, but I think at the end of the day, like what we're going to have to get to is like this data is shared between contract participants, and if it gets lost, it gets lost, and like you lose your money. So don't lose it, and maybe you outsource it to other people. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that actually answers your question. I'm excited about rollups. I'm more excited about the work that rollups are funding. Like if we end up with like really, really efficient ZK provers and verifiers, and that's all paid for by rollups, but we do something other than rollups, I think that's a great outcome.
Yeah. Okay. I want to like go back to something you said a little bit earlier, and now I'm just kind of zooming out, and you can take this however you want. What do you think people need? Okay, so I'll tell you what we've kind of discussed so far. Like collectibles on the L1. Okay, yep. And I think we're still sort of experimenting there. it's these are like off-chain consensus protocols anyways. So like we're kind of going to settle around something, but it seems like ordinals and BRC20s and maybe runes. So like we're going to have some L1 tokens and collectibles, and we'll see where that goes. Cold storage, wallets, self-custody, like that seems like a priority for you. This has been a priority for Bitcoiners for a long time. It's probably not solved yet, but like this is something that you seem to think is, paramount. And I think anybody who is in crypto and at least believes in the self-sovereignty aspects, like this has got to be like one of the most integral aspects, right? What else do you think people need? Because this is something I struggle with, like honestly. I mean, you can probably see from a lot of my tweets, like trolling about this. Like a lot of times I'm genuinely curious, like, we can experiment and we can do all of this, innovation, so on and so forth. But like, it's not immediately clear to me, like what financial primitives, like you were talking about being able to borrow against your Bitcoin. I think this should be an obvious use case, right? But like when it starts to get into more complex financial systems, I'm like, I really don't know. And also not only do I not know, but I also don't know if maybe that's okay on Ethereum or maybe that's okay on Solana. Like, you know what I mean? And so what do you look at and say Bitcoin? Oh, actually, let me phrase this more specifically. What do you look at in other ecosystems that have progressed to the point where we are, and you say, oh, Bitcoin really needs that? There are people who really need that are Bitcoiners.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's kind of two. Yeah, I'd say there's like two big things that if all you care about is Bitcoin is better money for whatever better means, maybe that's supply cap, maybe it's censorship resistance, like whatever that thing is. I think there's like two big things that are missing right now. One of them is some kind of reactive security component for L1 Bitcoin. I think that's probably something like a vault. I'm really, really, really interested in vaults. Before we just got on the phone, I just finished making a crappy but kind of impressive vault using only opcat. And so I'm like writing up a README about it, and hopefully later today I'm going to be like publishing it on a bunch of places for people to look at and start throwing tomatoes. But like if you think Bitcoin is going to be a long-term store of value, this idea that if somebody finds your keys or a signing quorum of your keys, then just like money gone and there's nothing that you can do about it. I think that actually materially limits the amount of value that can be stored in Bitcoin. Because like there's some threshold where people, institutions, whatever, are going to say like above this level, like I can't.
You were joking the other day about the ETF funds being stored on an open dime.
Dude, yeah.
That cracks me up.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like if you look at that, if you look at that ETF, their address management and like on-chain behavior is indistinguishable from an open dime. So until I see otherwise, I'm just going to assume that it's on an open dime. It's like legacy addresses. They never reuse them. They send everything in one transaction. Like that's an open dime, my guy, like straight up. So I think vaults, or if it's not vaults, something else that provides like reactive security is critical. And then, I think the lower value payments story is still a mess. Like, I don't think Lightning is the ultimate solution for end users, for a bunch of reasons that are, I think, actually unsolvable with the way Lightning works. Like there's, like there's just like a pure scaling component of like, we don't have enough blockchain space for everybody to have non-custodial Lightning channels. But if you could like wave that away, liquidity management is like really hard in an end user setting. And then the liveliness and like online requirements are just very hard to build in like a non-custodial end user scenario. And I think that like, what's interesting about Lightning is it obviates the on-chain footprint for individual transactions, but it doesn't actually scale UTXO ownership. So that's like the first problem of like, we don't have enough chain space. But then the other thing is, in exchange for not having to consume blockchain space for all these payments, you take on data availability, consistency, and liveliness problems that are totally reasonable if you're like running servers like highly available all the time, but just like don't work on mobile phones. And people are working on solutions to those, but they all come with trade-offs that kind of push up on whether or not these things are non-custodial and how big they're going to scale. So all that's to say that I don't think we have a construction yet that's going to let a billion people do payments like with Bitcoin on any layer. I think actually the best example of what I would love for this to look like is there's an ETH wallet called Argent that uses God, what is it? Now they're using Starknet, but before that they were using something else.
ZK Sync.
And like, you know, you download this wallet. Like you can download it right now. You hit receive, it shows you an address. You can like send me an email with that address and then turn off your phone, and I can like go and hit send, and like you get the money. It's like the L1 send receive experience, but it's like on an L2. There's some trade-offs with that. Like they have soft finality trade-offs. Like it's a roll-up that has like questionable decentralization story, like yada yada. But if you just take that as like the end user experience, because like what people expect in 2023 is they want, you know, Cash App or Venmo. Like you install an app, I install an app, I send money to your username, and you have the money now. And there's no like, oh shit, I couldn't find a route. Like none of that exists, right? And I think you know, the thing is that I think, especially in the Western world, most people are going to use whatever's the most convenient, unless something else is like 10 times better. And I think for most people, that's going to be your Venmo, your Cash App, eventually some FedNow thing. You know, where like the reason why Ordinals has kind of taken off, I think, is because Ordinals speculation is 10 times better than the next best thing, and you can't do it using Venmo. So I think in order to make payments happen on Bitcoin, you can't have a worse end user payment experience. You actually have to have something better. I think if we just got up to kind of Venmo level UX, people are still going to use Venmo because it's not better. So then we have to figure out like, what are the use cases or the applications that make people actually use Bitcoin? Maybe that's, you know, the sound money story is good enough that people, if they have kind of UX parity between like Venmo and this Bitcoin wallet that doesn't exist yet, maybe people over time start preferring Bitcoin because it has like the supply cap. Maybe it starts taking off in places where there's like more capital controls, or maybe we start using Bitcoin. Maybe if the Bitcoin payment velocity problem gets solved, then it starts being more attractive for people to accept Bitcoin for like online services, because it's like cheaper and easier, and like the developer experience is a lot better. And so maybe that's how you bootstrap it, is like people use Bitcoin to pay for online goods and services, because typing a credit card is still a pain in the ass, and Apple Pay hasn't had 100% penetration yet. So like maybe that's the route that we use to get to payments. But I mean, I don't know. Payments is hard. But I think generally like the things that are missing in Bitcoin, if you just want to use it as money, are reactive security on L1 and like more scalable, you know, end user payments infrastructure. I think without those things, Bitcoin ends up kind of just looking like gold long term, but like not even like great gold without vaults. And you know, if you're into Bitcoin because you want to knock over fiat, like I've got bad news for you. Like the treasury doesn't look at gold and like get worried about it. Like you know, fiat isn't afraid of gold. Fiat would be afraid of permissionless internet money that's pervasively used on the internet around the world. Like that's actually a threat to fiat. So I think, you know, if like the kind of ossificationists, I think miss this point, which is, you know, like supply cap alone doesn't mean that Bitcoin eats the world. Like people have to actually be able to use it at scale, and right now they can't.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think it's quite interesting that the direction you went with that was probably what I would agree with regards to Bitcoin. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion, maybe not just as of late, but more recently, about all the financial primitives and so on and so forth that we can build. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this has to do with roll-ups, what we're seeing there. You're working on, okay, so explain a very quick summary of covenants, and then we can talk about, you've been sort of hacking away at OP Cat recently. And I think this was the inspiration for the most recent Taproot Wizards collection as well.
Yep.
So what are you working on, and what are your thoughts on covenants, at least right now?
Yeah. So I mean, the short version for covenants is so every Bitcoin address is actually a little smart contract, and Bitcoin just has very restrictive smart contracting primitives. So like the kinds of smart contracts that you can write with Bitcoin right now are so every Bitcoin transaction has like inputs and outputs, right? So like money comes in, money goes out. Bitcoin smart contracts let you put restrictions on what conditions have to be satisfied on the inputs in order to spend this money. So if you think about just like normal Bitcoin transaction, I send you Bitcoin, you can spend this Bitcoin as long as you can produce a signature with a particular key pair, then you can spend the Bitcoin. Or you set up a multi-sig, as long as you can produce signatures with 2 out of these 3 keys. Or you can do a time lock, as long as I can produce signatures with 2 out of these 3 keys, and it's been 144 blocks, then you can spend the Bitcoin. So all of the Bitcoin sort of smart contracting primitives are all restrictions on the input side of a transaction. Covenants are a class of capabilities for putting restrictions on the output side. So imagine if you had coins that, you've got to produce a signature with a given key or set of keys, but also you can only spend those coins to a particular address. Or imagine if there's like an or in your script, like a disjunction where you say, I can spend these coins with my single sig to a particular address, or I can spend my coins with these 2 keys to any address. Like that starts getting more interesting, because now you can have a situation where you say like, all right, my cold storage, my store of value, my wealth, my savings, I'm going to have like an approved address. And maybe this is like my Coinbase account, or maybe it's like a hot wallet or something. And I can just push a button and sort of withdraw some amount of coins from my cold storage to like my warm storage. But if I want to send my coins to anywhere else, then I have to go on the big like national treasure hunt and like gather 15 keys together and bring them all together. Right. And so covenants are just like, how do you restrict the future movement of coins? Not just like how do you unlock them, but how do you restrict where they go? And the reason why that's interesting, one of them is like what I just described about like having more flexible spending conditions, but also if you wanted to do like multi-party ownership. So let's say that there's 5 people who all want to contribute 1 Bitcoin into like a shared UTXO. What you'd like to be able to do is set up a construction where it's like, if everybody agrees, then, so this is like a little mini DAO, right? If everybody agrees, then the coins can go everywhere. But at any point, if one person wants to be able to just take their money and leave and unilaterally exit, then they need to be able to construct a transaction that says, out of this 5 Bitcoin UTXO, 1 Bitcoin goes to my address and 4 Bitcoin goes back to this new address that's like composed of the remaining signers. So in order to do that, like you have to have one person be able to sign a transaction that doesn't have arbitrary spendability, but has restrictions on how they spend it. Like I can take my money and leave, but I can't take your money and leave. So that general idea ends up being the root of a lot of ideas that people have for how we do, for how we scale Bitcoin. Cause like there's not enough chain space for everybody in the world to have a UTXO. So maybe what we can do instead is have more people sharing UTXOs. But in order for them to share UTXOs, they have to be able to unilaterally exit, or we might as well just have like custodial bank accounts. So you'll if people like want to dig into these ideas, you'll see things listed like coin pools or lightning channel factories. All of these things rely on there being some off-chain protocol to coordinate signatures for how you sort of advance the state of a shared UTXO, but you still have some unilateral spendability. So there's a lot of different ways to build this. So like the one that I think has probably the most community consensus is this idea from a guy named Jeremy Rubin called OpCTV. It's check template verify. So this is like you can make like a future transaction, hash it, and then commit to that hash in your script. And so when you go to spend, you say, I can spend as long as this transaction sort of matches this hash commitment that I've previously committed to. And if you imagine having like a tree of those things, then you can have sort of like multiple successive transactions all like committed ahead of time, and say coins have to move along these like pre-computed paths. And that's like really interesting. So CTV is one. There's another one called Any Prev Out, which like Lightning people really like because it enables like a better version of Lightning. But there have been a lot of other proposals that have come out for different ways of doing covenants, and there's been some amount of bike shedding on it. And like the meat of the discussion is like, do we want covenants that are super general and super powerful, but could open up like MEV or could open up like applications that we don't want on Bitcoin? Or do we want to do like hyper restrictive covenants that are very particular to use cases? And if we go that direction, like which are the right use cases? What's the optimal thing? So finding like the right place in that sort of spectrum is where like the smart part of the discussion is. There's a dumb discussion, which is like, we should never change Bitcoin. It's perfect. Like ossify it. But like those people are dumb. But like the smart discussion is like, how general should this be? So what we did on Taproot Wizards is, there's been a lot of discussion, mostly around either CTV or kind of derivatives of it, where people have looked at CTV and made it like a little bit more general or a little bit more specific, or like, but they're all kind of like flavors of CTV. One of the things that always comes up in these discussions is in 2021, Andrew Polstra, who's like a absolutely brilliant researcher at Blockstream, wrote a blog post basically saying, if you just had opcat, which is concatenate. So you take two elements and you smush them together. If you just had opcat, you could do some Schnorr signature magic and do covenants. And he like didn't produce any code. He didn't like build any applications. He just like yeeted this blog post out there. And ever since then, anytime anybody talks about CTV, people say like, oh, we shouldn't do CTV. We should just do cat. And so an idea that we had was, if we think that we can use NFTs to rally a community and get people to unite behind a common cause and like push something forward, which usually people do that just to like, pump their bags. Could we harness that energy and use it to try to push like the covenant conversation forward? So we think it's super important at Taproot Wizards that Bitcoin gets some kind of covenant, whether that's opcat or if it's CTV or if it's something else. We're kind of happy. Like we think that we need covenants in order to build these new primitives for Bitcoin, but we think that the conversation has stalled out and gotten stuck. And we think one of the reasons why that conversation has stalled out and gotten stuck is that it's a very small group of people who are talking about it. They've been having the same conversation for a couple of years. And, there just needs to be like more energy and enthusiasm and discussion. And maybe we need to get like new ideas into the space. And so what we decided to do was build a set of cats, because like everybody loves cats, that specifically draw attention to opcat and like the cat flavored version of covenants. But we want to encourage people to look at and explore and experiment with covenants generally. And if the outcome of opcat and us trying to push the covenant conversation forward, if the outcome of that is the Bitcoin community comes to consensus that like, we don't actually want cat, we want this other thing. And maybe it's informed by the work on cat, maybe it's not, like whatever. But if we move forward and we get to something, then like, that's a great outcome. If the, outcome is like, oh, wow, cat is actually what we want, or maybe it's not cat on its own, maybe it's cat with some other opcodes and we bundle that up into a soft fork and we all get excited about it. Like, that's great too. But what we're trying to do is just move the conversation forward and either get covenants into Bitcoin or come to agreement that covenants are never going to happen. And we have to find some other way of enabling this functionality. And maybe it's like opzk verify. Maybe it's something that nobody's thought of before. Like, I don't really know.
You wrote a pretty long tweet just a couple days ago about something you had worked on that specifically with regards to cat that said something. I don't know if I honestly, I can't recall exactly what you said, but the essence was this can enable recursive covenants. Is that right? Like if parsed together correctly, and like I don't know, you could probably explain better than I can, but for the Bitcoin community, hearing recursion and recursive covenants is oftentimes like a big
trigger.
I don't know, red flag, but yeah. I mean, it goes beyond even some of the more, I would say, willing to innovate, willing to, I mean, when you start talking about recursion, people are like, oh, this is really bad. Like this is really, really bad. So what were your conclusions with that? Also, my friend Post Capone is like demanding that I ask you a lot about OPCAT and like what the different hacks are with it. So I'm interested to hear specifically about that, and then we can move on.
Yeah, I mean, so on recursive, so let's talk about recursive covenants for a second, and then like let's definitely talk about cat, because I've been like living the cat life for a few days, and I've learned a lot about what you can do with cat and what you can't do with cat, and man, it is ugly, but it works. So I think the recursive covenants thing is a little bit of a red herring. So there's been like a lot of covenants FUD over the years. And there's a real, I forgot what it's called. What is it, like Brandolini's principle? Or like there's this like bullshit asymmetry principle, right? So I think that like really bites us here a lot. Where one piece of covenant FUD was like, if we have covenants, then people are going to put our coins in like these covenants that you can only spend to government whitelists or blacklists, and that's like easily dispelled FUD. The recursive covenant fear, as far as I can tell, is rooted in this idea that like, if we have recursive covenants, then your coins can get stuck in a covenant that they can like never escape from, and it'll like burn your coins. And I think that that's not really rational for two reasons. One of them is one of the things that we celebrate in Bitcoin is anytime you lose your keys, it makes everybody a little bit richer. So if somebody wants to like burn their coins by sending them into a black hole covenant, then like, fine, like, thank you for pumping my bags. The second thing is even with a like enumerated covenant like CTV, where you have to so with CTV, you have to explicitly define all the future paths and like hash them and then commit to that hash. I can make a CTV chain that's 100 million transactions long. So if your coins are stuck in a contract that's going to take 100 million transactions to unwind, it's basically never ending. Like your great, great, great grandchildren will be living under the boot of my smart contract because like it hasn't unwound all the way yet. So, the thing that recursive covenants give us is from a programmability and composition perspective, like it's a lot easier to reason about a little block of code that's like recursively defined than it is to say like, okay, I need to enumerate this tree of 10 million states and then be able to like invariant check all of them to make sure that that's all sane. Maybe that's worth doing, but I think that there's also like, this gets into the practicality point. Like if we're trying to build like a UTXO sharing protocol that I'm going to be doing on my phone and you're going to be doing on your phone, then every time we exchange state, we're both going to have to be able to recompute like what the address is that we're sending to. And if recomputing that address requires that you compute this like billion state tree, hash it all, send it back and forth, and then like, oh, your hash is different from my hash. So now we have to like bisect and figure out like where we disagree. If it's like a recursive covenant, then you just say like, all right, here's the code, here's the invariance, and like done. So I don't know. I think that the fear is overblown, and like we might be missing some practical engineering benefits by just like ruling them out. If somebody can say, here's the bad thing that recursive covenants enable, so we don't want it, I think that's a great conversation to have, and we should have it. But so far, most of what I've heard is like, I don't want my coins to end up in like the never-ending black hole, and like I don't think that's actually a real thing.
Yeah, I want to ask you something along those lines. I was talking to somebody who he's not a core dev, but he's building on Bitcoin, and he's somebody he's building with DLCs right now. Like he's truly building with discrete log contracts. Somebody who I think is very sharp, and not that I have a really good gauge on that when it comes to technical stuff, but this is somebody who I think understands the Bitcoin code very well. And he was talking to me, and I was asking about CTV, because this CTV now has been probably the most discussed, I would say, covenant in the past year or so. And it does seem to be, I don't know, some vague consensus forming around this, right? And there's even there's back and forth conversations on Twitter now about this between people who may be sort of in the old guard and then the newer, I don't know, builders. And there seems to be like some productive conversation being had.
Yeah.
I talked to this kid who, and the reason I'm telling you that he is a builder is because I think this is relevant to what I'm about to say. He said, look, like CTV would probably even help us, or covenants in general would help us. But he was like, he brought, I was talking about how I was going to interview you, and he was like, look, there are like 3 or 4 people looking at these things. And this was his concern. And I mean, this is what he was saying. And we saw, I mean, just earlier today, I saw Shinobi mention that, you're the one hacking away on OP-Cat. And like, you're the one who's figured out that this enables some type of recursive, implementation or whatever. But I did find that very interesting because I've been, as somebody who kind of tries to understand to the extent that I can from the non-technical side, but say, okay, look, this like CTV seems like pretty well looked over and seems like pretty, like I think there's a lot of people who are saying like this could be the covenant we need to put in. But I was really interested to hear a young kid who I think like closer to my age, younger, and he's saying like, look, like I love the idea of building on Bitcoin, but I'm telling you right now, there's like 3 or 4 people looking at these things, and like Peter Wheeler is retiring, or and I thought that was really interesting because I don't know that. So I mean, what are your thoughts on like Bitcoin Core? Everybody seems to be working on their own kind of like little project, and then how many people are there that really understand this stuff that are saying like, we need to battle test this for X amount of time? And I'll just add one other thing. What he was saying, which I thought was quite interesting. He was like, look, we need 5 Rijndaels for a year, and we need Jack Dorsey to pay these guys to try to break this stuff, like truly break this. And at that point, we can kind of come to some consensus, because I mean, I don't even know that he thought anything was ready yet, but I don't know. Like, once again, I'm not taking a side here, but I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on like how many people you think in the Bitcoin community are really like digging into this stuff, maybe to the extent that you are.
I think it's a really small number. And, so I really like CTV. Like the fork that I would run tomorrow, like literally tomorrow, is James O.B., who's like a Bitcoin Core contributor, put out a soft fork proposal called Cov Tools, which was like CTV, APO, and a thing called OpVault, which gets you vaults, which is like, I mentioned before, the 2 things that we need are like reactive security on L1 and like better L2 scaling. Vaults solve the first one. So like I would literally run that tomorrow. I think one of the things that's like been challenging about the CTV conversation is, and one of the reasons why I liked Vault is it's like hard to articulate to the median Bitcoin user, like why CTV matters. And I think, especially before ordinals, but even now, I think it's like really, really hard to articulate what the scaling challenges that Bitcoin has and why we have to solve them. And there's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing where I think a lot of people will say things like, there's not actually enough demand for Bitcoin transactions to force us to do scaling. So like we'll cross this bridge when we get to it. I think the flip side of that is, like I don't want to do like an appeal to authority thing, but like I've worked at a lot of large companies and small companies, like I've done startups, I've done Fortune 5 companies where we're evaluating, technology. And in one of them, I was leading an effort to try to do something that involved integrating with a public blockchain. And, when you look at use at that scale, looking at a technology that has a hard transaction like cap and there's no clear actionable path to fix it is like a problem, right? Like if we build the crazy layer 2 thing that could do like easy end user non-custodial payments, even if it didn't get picked up tomorrow, the fact that it exists and is practical, I think would actually bring a lot of development to Bitcoin. Because I think there's a lot of people for whom like Bitcoin would be a good technology, but they say like there isn't a credible path to all of this scaling yet. And so like, we're not going to make the investment. So all that's to say that like, I think one of the things that's hard about the covenants discussion generally is, you like, in order to care about that conversation, you have to simultaneously be able to acknowledge Bitcoin's current limitations and also be optimistic that in spite of those limitations, demand is going to grow over time. And if you can acknowledge both those things, then you say, all right, we have to do something. And then the funnel gets narrower, because then in order to like understand the trade-offs in the design space, like you have to be technical. You do have to push back on some existing Bitcoin like marketing and dogma. Like I've gotten this pushback a lot where we say, hey, we need covenants, and people say, why do you need to change L1, change L2? And it's like, no. The problem is you can't do L2s without changing the L1 in the way that we want to. And so, I think it's like you're already starting with like a small subset of the Bitcoin user base who actually care about this and are actually equipped to have meaningful conversations about it. And then out of that subset of people, you've got a lot of developers who are just like interested in other stuff. Like, Peter Wolla, he's been working a whole bunch on a thing called BIP 324, which is like encrypted P2P transport. It's like super important work. It's really hard. I'm glad he's doing it. But like, that's time he's not spending on covenants. And like, maybe he's just not interested in it. And like, that's fine. Like, Bitcoin's an open participation system. Like, you can work on whatever you want. I'm not going to berate people for not working on the things that I think that they should be working on. But like, there is just this like small number of people are like interested in this problem. And then, like out of that group, I think that then there's an even smaller number of people who are actually willing to like go and write applications. Like, there's a lot of people who kind of understand the economics, but like aren't devs. And then, we've shrunk the funnel down to a very small group of people who can actually like go write code and are inclined to do that. And then I think you then run into this other problem, which is like, okay, you can go and build a demo application to show this stuff off, but without money at stake, nobody's going to use it. And then people point to the lack of use and say, see, there's no market demand. Like if we really needed CTV, then people would be going and using this like CTV app on testnet. But because nobody's using it, I guess CTV isn't actually the real thing. And then there's like a chicken and egg thing of like, I worked at a wallet before Taproot Wizards. Like, I really wanted to experiment with like vault opcodes for a wallet because it makes sense. But, I can't convince my GM that we should take 5 developers and go spend a year building like a kick-ass user-friendly like mobile wallet that's contingent on an opcode that might never get activated. Like, that's just like a bad investment for the company. So it's hard. And like, I don't think anybody really knows what the answer is. So that's part of why for Quantum Cats, we're like, fuck it, let's just drum up some vibes and see where we get.
Do you think that this ordinal, maybe what you guys have kind of kickstarted is, I think I know what Udi and Eric are attempting to do. I think that they have seen crypto and they've seen this hack, right? Which in many cases in crypto are these tokens, and we don't have to go into that again, but that's sort of their public goods financing mechanism, right? Like that and I will say one thing about these tokens. We kind of talked about the nebulous governance and property rights ascribed to them, but what they absolutely do is they fund these projects. And I think this is what you guys are attempting to do. Like, I mean, functionally, and I think this makes sense. I think it is very hard on Bitcoin. And this has long been kind of the chicken or the egg problem just from Bitcoin development. It's like, it's very hard to get people to write free open source software when they can go and maybe launch a token. I mean, I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but like this is who we're competing against, And so I think I've always, it's funny because I've always been sympathetic in a sense toward Bitcoin developers for this reason. It's not saying anything about crypto or Web3 developers. I just think that they have a hack, right? They have like a true hack in these tokens, and this is something that's very difficult with Bitcoin. And I think, I mean, would you agree that like maybe the ordinals, this sort of new movement is an attempt to kind of harness that financing of these things that we may really want, but we've never really had the ability to bring developers?
I think it's a couple things, and just to like be clear about something, because like people ask questions, right? So like one of the things that I think can be a little bit sketchy or scammy about issuing, whether it's tokens or NFTs or something else, like we were talking about the nebulous property rights, is like thinking that you get something in exchange for the token, or that like you get some ownership. So something that I think we've tried to be very clear about, but I'll just say it explicitly in case anybody like hasn't seen it, right? Is like, if you mint a quantum cat, if you buy a quantum cat, you're not like buying a piece of Taproot Wizards. You're not like buying the company, Taproot Wizards, the company. You're not like buying a development effort. Like we, Taproot Wizards, the company, like recognize the revenue from the sale of quantum cats as revenue. And like, we're going to use it to pay for things that we want to go do as a company. One of the things that we want to do, like I'm the CTO of this company, I want to go and hire developers, and I want to hire product designers, and I want to hire, project managers, and I want to build products and services for Bitcoin that help push Bitcoin forward technically and culturally. And some of that's going to be related to covenants, some of that's going to be related to L2, some of that's going to be related to ordinal stuff. And so like, yeah, I mean, like in the way that, if I go and buy an Apple laptop, I am contributing to the funding of like Apple technology, because like they take that revenue and they turn around and they hire developers and like they build better Apple laptops. Like in that way, we are selling products and services, and then we're going to be, taking the revenue from that, and we're going to be building more products and services. And it just so happens that the first product that we've brought to market is a digital collectible that we are also using to try to mobilize a community to try to push the culture on Bitcoin upgrades forward. Like as a company, we're also, investing in, product development and technology that we think will help push Bitcoin forward. So, I mean, like to answer your question, like it is a hack, but it's also just a hack in the way of having product market fit, and like having customers pay for your wares is a hack. And I think that there's been a little bit of like a weird Protestant or not Protestant. What's the word I'm looking for? It's stronger than that. It's Puritan. There's like a little bit of a weird puritanical thing that happens in like Bitcoin companies, where I think a lot of Bitcoiners think either you can like go and be a profitable company, or you can do the right thing for Bitcoin. And I think at the end of the day, like in order to do the right thing for Bitcoin, you have to have a profitable company to like make that development sustainable. And so I think, like our goal is to build products and services that have product market fit that people pay us for. And then we can, continue to grow as a company and make more things that make Bitcoin better.
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on. And I mean, like the fact of the matter is, all of these Bitcoin only companies, however you want to define that, like they sell something. It's not. It's like it's capitalism. It's not like no. That certainly is not lost upon me. I've just been thinking about this more with like just maybe more from just kind of being maybe I don't know. Sympathetic sounds a little bit cringe, but like sure. I understand why it is. Yeah, it's difficult for. Yeah, we've just it's hard when you look at crypto, I would say, and I'm not like being. It's not.
I think like the two things that make that bad in the eyes of a lot of, or in the eyes of what I'd say like our stereotypical Bitcoiners, because I think the other thing that's like a unique perspective that our camp has that maybe some of the latter people on Bitcoin Twitter don't have is like, I think the really vocal like laser-eyed maximalists are actually just a vocal minority. Like I think most people who have Bitcoin are actually like have
They don't
different
care
views.
at all what the lasers say.
No,
I mean,
like,
they probably don't
really
even know they exist.
Yeah, Bitcoin
Like, my
Twitter is
dad
not the
owns
same as
Bitcoin. He has no idea that there's a group of like AR toting, Citadel owning Bitcoin maxis.
No.
And no, that's not lost upon me, of course. So yeah, I think you're spot on about that.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the two things that make the whole like token issuance for funding thing a little bit of like a no-no for some people. One of them is like, look, if you think that the whole point of Bitcoin is that we have one money and it's hard to create, then like going and printing money in order to like fund things is like a little sketch. And then the other thing is just like what we were talking about before of like are you selling people a bill of goods and they think they're buying something that they're not, or are they like informed consumers? And I think if somebody's like an informed consumer and they know what they're buying, then like that's just like fair market capitalism. It's different if you make a token and say, hey, we're going to go and like build all this stuff. And if you buy this token, then you are like entitled to some legal claim on it. And then that ends up being unenforceable. And what you actually have is like this questionable
responsibility to vote.
Exactly. Right. Like
Yeah.
I think those are very different things.
I would say one thing, and I'm just going to give my personal opinion here, not that it really matters, but one thing that I have thought, maybe, and why I shot on the fence here, it's less whether or not people should be able to issue these tokens. Like, I don't think it. I try to take the stance that it's not the government's right to tell people they shouldn't issue tokens or whatever.
Yeah.
I think maybe more is just like, we have seen hundreds of billions of dollars go into crypto, right?
Yeah.
And I think maybe initially when I heard Eric and maybe some of this new school Bitcoiners, like the only thing that I would push back on potentially is just like, okay, let's define what we mean by all in the innovation happening elsewhere. It's not like the rails of finance run atop Ethereum. And I don't even say this critically. Like, you have to understand that this isn't like, but it's one of these things where it's like, okay, like I see that there's developers there. I see that people work on ZK stuff. I see people working on all these, new financial primitives, but like, the adoption of crypto relative, like as a ratio of the amount of money put in, it's like, well, I mean, I don't know, like, does Bitcoin have to have that? It's like, if, so I think this is one pushback that I've seen from maybe some of the more even keeled of the kind of Puritan, if such a thing exists.
Yeah, I mean, like I'll double down on that. Like I'll give you even more, right? Which is, I think the broader crypto ecosystem. I forget who said it, but somebody said this, and I was just like, "Yep, nailed it." Like I heard somebody say, like it started as like cypherpunk electronic money, but they ended up just really building like shadow banking for degenerate gamblers, which, like, fair enough. I think, like, I'm interested. Like, I don't think the future of finance is going to run on Ethereum. I don't think the future of finance is probably going to run on any public blockchain. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons.
Probably tend to agree, but
I mean, like, I like Bitcoin as neutral, interoperable, permissionless internet money, right? Like the I still kind of really remember the moment that Bitcoin made the most sense to me. Was I did a weekend project and I like built a little web service that like you could connect and you could like pay me money. I vended a service, and like the service was like, I went and set up like DNS for you. So it was like a purely electronic thing. You don't have to worry about like, oh, are you shipping me the shoes? Like I manipulated some other bits for you that you could not otherwise manipulate. And then I could like send out money. And I had this like aha moment of, the modern web was really built, like the key ingredient to getting the web to where it is now was this thing called the LAMP stack. It was like you could install Linux, Apache, MySQL, and like PHP. And it's these like 4 open source tools that you buy any old crappy computer, you install these things, and then like you go and borrow some books from the library, and anywhere you are, anywhere in the world, you can like install these 4 pieces of open source software, plug into the internet, and you can now build any application that you want that connects to anybody else in the world, and like nobody can stop you. And that was amazing. And if you think about that, and like we've got web servers, mail servers, database servers. Like the missing piece that we had was like the money server. And Bitcoin for me, like in that moment was like, oh my God, this is like the open source money server. Like, of course, this is what you want. And so I think like that plus the kind of digital scarcity thing is like what Bitcoin is to me. It's this limited supply. Nobody can like mess with it and like change the inflation rate. And it's like this permissionless like money server that anybody can use to build whatever they want. And if you kind of get that into the DNA of the internet, and if it grows at the rate of the internet, then it ends up like taking over the world. That's different from saying everything in finance has to run on top of that. Like everything in finance is still going to run in, enterprises and Oracle databases and like all this shit, but like they'll interact on this like common ledger to exchange value. The thing that I think is interesting and innovative, like the big thing that I'm envious of when I look at other ecosystems is like all the ZK stuff. Like, when I kind of got into cryptography many years ago, general purpose, succinct zero knowledge proofs were this like fairy tale, like just like didn't exist. And then, Greg Maxwell did this thing with a snark in like 2015 where he did an atomic swap for like a Sudoku solution. And that was like amazing, but it was still kind of like moon mathy. And then you've had this like crazy degenerate DeFi ecosystem over the last couple of years has just funneled billions of dollars into ZK R&D. And like the math is actually in a really good space now. And like now there's like decent tooling, and you've got like Cairo, which is a higher level language that like has static analysis tooling, and you've got like all these other things. And I think like some kind of general purpose ZKP is going to be useful for Bitcoin to do Bitcoiny things, because I think in order for Bitcoin to scale, you're going to need to get more state off chain. And I think a succinct, non-interactive zero knowledge proof is important to have like constant validation cost on the main chain of a ever growing amount of off chain activity. And so like, I'm not super interested in trying to say like, hey, how do we do like the EVM on Bitcoin? I don't think that's interesting. I also don't think it's going to have product market fit. Like wrapped Bitcoin exists today. You're not going to get all the Ethereum developers to light their bags on fire and come over to like EVM on top of Bitcoin. Like, I don't think any EVM Bitcoin sidechain is ever going to meaningfully take market share away from Ethereum. It just doesn't make sense. But I do want to like rip off the billions of dollars of ZK R&D and like come use that to make better Bitcoin payments. Like I like that just seems like a all upside to me.
Interesting. Okay, I want to pivot just a little bit.
Want to talk about cat? I've been like avoiding talking about cat this whole time. I haven't been actually avoiding it. We just keep talking about other stuff.
Well, I wanted. Okay, yeah, sure. We can talk about cat. I also wanted to just talk to you about your thoughts on MEV on Bitcoin. Yeah, we can get back to cat. I don't want to keep you like way too long, but I have to dig in. I did talk to Eric about this some. He gave me some examples. Like I think your Sofon bot. This is. Yeah. Is it so? I don't know. I still know how to pronounce it. Anyways, this bot was an example of MEV on Bitcoin. There are people who think that there's going to be a tremendous amount of MEV on Bitcoin. Most of what I have seen, at least from a very high level, it doesn't resemble the MEV on Ethereum or these other chains. I think also I have come around to understanding why that may be the case. But I also want to hear, like, just we don't have to define MEV. I'm assuming that most people know, but you can just talk about what you're seeing and what you see as the future of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, oh man, it's gonna be really interesting. Like, I think so you asked me earlier about like tokens and runes. I think that's actually going to be really interesting in changing the potential for MEV on Bitcoin. So like, a core cultural value at Taproot Wizards, it's not enshrined anywhere, but it's a thing that we've just done, is like I tend to write software to troll people. So like the Sofon was definitely like troll software. I've got a whole roadmap of other troll software that I'm going to write. One piece of troll software that I'm considering writing is I realized that if you had So I originally spec'd this out for BRC20, but I think it'll be better with runes. So if you had so let's say that there's a Bitcoin payment that you wanted to make. And in that Bitcoin payment, you included as an input some rune or like a BRC20 transfer inscription. But you made it so that anybody could spend the output of that. So it's a rune, like I've got 2 inputs and 2 outputs, and like one input is like my money and the destination. One output is like a rune, and then like anybody can kind of like redeem it on the other side. If you fired that out and either there was somebody running a piece of software that saw that and then claimed that rune and did a child pays for parent, or if a miner was running a piece of software and saw that and just included it in a block in order to collect that rune, then you could propagate a transaction that pays under the clearing rate for fees or potentially pays 0 fees. So in the Ethereum world, this would be like a gasless transaction. So you could effectively pay your mining fees in runes and not in Bitcoin, which is like sketchy from like a miner incentives thing. Yeah. So because, like the thing that makes people worried about MEV on Bitcoin is like, what you want is you want anybody to be able to plug an S19 in a waterfall somewhere and run Bitcoin Core and say, get block template, and have that block template be just as profitable as anybody else's block template. Because like if creating profitable block templates becomes like specialized activity or relies on a lot of like off-chain state, then that drives like miner centralization, and then you get into like capture. So, the thing that's scary is it's like, do we end up in a world where in order to construct profitable Bitcoin transactions, do you also have to run like a runes indexer, right? Is like the question. And I have no idea. I think like MEV ends up looking different on Bitcoin than Ethereum because the account model versus the UTXO model have just like different semantics, and like you can have out of order Bitcoin transactions in different ways than you can do out of order Ethereum transactions. Cause like for a given, it's been a while since I've like really looked at Ethereum dev, but like for a given Ethereum account, you need to sequence your transactions and have like an incrementing like non-sur counter. And like with Bitcoin, it's as long as your UTXOs don't get double spent, like order doesn't really matter. So, I think like one of the things that people get worried about with CAT or other things is, are we going to end up accidentally recreating Uniswap on Bitcoin? I don't think we are. But if we did, like, would that open us up to MEV? I think that the practical concern is probably a little bit different. Like, I think multi-party contracts end up looking very different on Bitcoin than they do on Ethereum because of UTXOs and because of like limitations in Bitcoin script. I think where it gets weird is I think it gets weird in 2 places. One of them is if you can start paying transaction fees with things that require off-chain state to validate, that's where you have like credible MEV. And I think the other one that's funky that you actually hit earlier is like, if we have open minting systems, do miners just say like, screw you, I'm getting all of the tokens? I think those are like 2 places where we could actually see it. The whole like Uniswap on Bitcoin thing like doesn't really keep me up at night.
Are you currently with just BRC20s, and you say maybe this becomes increasingly concerning with Rune, or maybe not, but you think your little troll software is going to work better with runes? Are you worried about this? Is kind of like an out of band payment. Would you agree? Yeah. Like, okay, because I think a lot of the concern, the concern is not, in my opinion at least, is not that miners are making more off fees. Like this isn't the concern. It's like what you said, the centralizing forces of this, right? And if miners can receive, like for example, let's say there's going to be an ordinal collection minted, if they can make more money by getting 10% of the supply or 20% of the supply, and in turn selling that, versus an in-band transaction
Yep.
That is, I think, like this is where the centralizing forces come in my opinion. Also, and this is why I do tend to agree with you guys actually pretty strongly about like not filtering the mempool, because then you create an out of band mempool, and this is what happens.
Yes.
And what we've
Yes.
seen on all of these other chains. Now, I do think it once again it's different because the overwhelming functionally, I mean, I'm not saying this exactly the right way, but functionally, the overwhelming majority of Bitcoin transactions are peer to peer. So it's like there's not really ways to front run that in the same way that on Ethereum, interacting with all this state and all this contract provides all these opportunities to front run or back run or sandwich or whatever these types of transactions. So like ideally, I think, and this is something that you guys have been talking about, and I've seen other people talk about this, even some of the more Puritans, is look, like ruining the mempool is very, very bad. Like ideally, we want people to be able to broadcast a transaction from their node to the mempool and not be concerned. And once again, if it's peer-to-peer transactions, then that's not a huge concern. Like because a miner, if you pay a sufficient fee, a miner will ultimately include that. Would you agree like that's sort of the essence of it? That would you agree that like this statefulness is what is concerning, and then also these kind of like out of band payments for these other protocols that exist atop Bitcoin, which is sort of a form of statefulness unto itself. Like is this what you're thinking?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's like there's kind of so I strongly agree with what you just said about private mempools. Like if you were to say we're going to filter all the ordinals out of the mempool, last year $250 million were paid in mining fees for ordinals. So there's like very strong economic incentives of if they can't make it into the mempool, and like I've already had DM conversations with 2 mining pools who have asked me like, hey, if hypothetically we were going to make a direct transaction submission API, like what features would you like straight up? And like I kind of half joke with the filterers, like please filter the mempool, because if you do, I will go and make a deal with all the mining pools to do submission, and then I'll open it up as a service and I'll collect a fee. And I'm going to buy like not 1, not 2, but 3 yachts with like the amount of money I'm going to make from just like ferrying these transactions straight to miners, because there's so much demand for it. That's bad for Bitcoin though, because like what you don't want is you don't want it to end up in a situation where like in the future, the only way to be a profitable miner is that you have to have access to this like private order flow. And that private order flow is established between like the large demand aggregators and like a small number of mining pools. And then that small number of mining pools is like the people who get the OFAC list. So like filtering the mempool is really bad. Things that drive significant fee volume out of band is like bad. And we should be working towards making those fee markets more accessible and more broadly accessible. So like if for example, I'm not saying this would happen, but like if for example, relay filtering did become broadly implemented and people couldn't make like certain data carrying transactions, a healthy response to that would be like not filtering, but like another one might be like build a open alternate relay network on top of something like Nostr that any miner can hook into, so that it's not direct transaction submission APIs. It's like an open broadcast network and any miner can plug into it. Because like that's what you want. You want it to be like an open relay system. But like the real solution is just not do it. And then on the other point that you made, like the reason why it's harder to do some kinds of MEV on Bitcoin than it is on Ethereum is because in Ethereum, you have a lot of state being manipulated across multiple contracts in a single transaction. And so a lot of like the front running and sandwich stuff is just like, I identify which state you're going to manipulate. I go and manipulate it first. And then like, you now have to pay me for it. With Bitcoin transactions are usually like scoped to just the state of that transaction. And It's not really possible for somebody to like malleate the state of your transaction. Right. Where things get interesting is if we start building up like multi-party protocols that have like a lot of state that it's depending on. then maybe you can like front run my interaction with this like multi-party protocol. So like, and I think that those problems are going to be up to protocol designers to solve. So like the Sophon bot was actually a good example of that, right? Like they had this global piece of state, which was the list of claimed tickers in BRC20. And I wrote a bot that could front run it and register it first. They've countered that by there's some BRC20 issuers who are going straight to miners. So they're bypassing the mempool in order to avoid the Sophon. And then there's some BRC20 derivatives that actually introduced a proof of work requirement. So you have to like grind a certain number of zeros into the transaction hash of the minting or the deployment transaction to make it more expensive to run something like a Sophon bot, which I thought was super fucking based. And like, I'm proud of them. That's
interesting. So is your prediction that because I did hear Eric say this, and like there will be a similar, in Ethereum it's called PBS, Proposer Builder Separation. It's these relays that ultimately, sort of take bundles of transactions and bring them to miners. Like, is it like what is your sort of like off the cuff prediction? Is this something we see, or is this less likely? Is this something that Bitcoin probably will never have to contend with just because it's not as efficient as doing it elsewhere?
Yeah, I think it's less likely. I think what's going to end up happening. Well, okay, what I hope happens is even with like new L2s, they're constructed in a way that you can still just do like a sort by fee rate on the mempool, and that's still like a reasonably efficient block template. Look, there's ways today that if you have the right relationships and connections, like can you create a block template that's like a little bit more efficient than like what you get by just sorting by fee rate? Like sure, but I don't think that you have destruction of the network kind of risk by having people be able to eke out an extra like 1 or 2%. Like where it gets bad is when specialized template construction is so much more profitable that the miners who can do it can deploy more capex, can like buy more hash rate and deploy at a faster rate than people who don't have
like
that.
Just increasing returns to scale, economies of scale. Like this is the concern, and I think that if there is anything to learn, I mean, Ethereum has a lot of really gigabrains working on this, but I mean, if there is anything to learn, it's like MEV is a centralizing force, and like I have come around, but I have come to the conclusion that it's not good. Like miners making money is good, but MEV is not good, and there's been somewhat, I think, and there's been some pushback on this recently within the Ethereum community. It's sort of like good MEV and bad MEV, when it's like okay, like it's bad, like it's mainly bad, and to the extent that we can prevent it, it's because it is the strongest centralizing force, and it is it's existential, like absolutely existential, and it's like I think a little bit. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like my perception of it, and like I don't work on ETH MEV, so I'm like talking over my skis a little bit here, but
I don't either.
Yeah, but I mean, like my view on it, right, is like it's bad, but the realization was like it's really bad, but we can't actually get rid of it. So how do we make it less bad by making it a more open market, right? Like the whole like proposer builder separation thing is like, okay, we want anybody who's going to start validating blocks to have as good a shot at the MEV as other people. So we're going to have like these like open relay networks between like builders and shit, and like we're going to make it so that more people can compete in MEV instead of having fewer people compete in MEV. It's still bad, but if it's like equally bad across the validator set, then it's
these are the validators that are receiving this, but like in terms of the actual block construction,
that's way more centralized. Yeah, for sure.
You could argue that like Bitcoin block construction are like very wealthy miners themselves, but like I think that the thing with this, I think the thing with proposer builder separation, I mean, it has brought a decreasing number of very lucrative builders, and it is like it's like an unsolvable problem, like functionally. And for what it's worth, the solution really, like from everything that has sort of been proposed, it's like the solutions are centralizing forces unto themselves. Like a lot of it is going out of band, like you're talking about. A lot of it is going to these like RPCs that protect, that shield your transactions. Okay, but you're trusting them, and like until then. So yeah, I think that like I love like crypto, but I also am like, when I see this kind of idea of MEV is going to be like good for Bitcoin, I'm like, no, guys, like, hang on now. This is not good. Like, and not in the way, and maybe even I've thought that maybe even like there could be higher returns to scale with like hardware and in Bitcoin. Like, I suspect something like that could be like very, very detrimental. But I mean, once again, I guess a lot of this depends on like how much people want to use these sort of like exogenous protocols atop Bitcoin, and maybe it's not like so well designed for that. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think the other thing that's like really hard about this stuff is there's a huge gulf between things being theoretically possible and things actually being able to like compete in the market and like being practical.
Yeah.
And so, look, if there's strong enough incentives, like people will do the engineering. But I think there's also like some cases where, like, okay, just because you could do an Ethereum sidechain, I'm going to beat up on that example a lot more. That doesn't mean that thing is actually going to be competitive in the market, right? And so, like, do we want to avoid any change to Bitcoin that could potentially enable an Ethereum sidechain? Because if we had an Ethereum sidechain, then the Ethereum MEV could impact which, Merkle hash you commit to the Bitcoin blockchain, and that ends up creating MEV for the Bitcoin miners, because in order for them to like choose the right transaction to include, they need to now understand Ethereum state. Like, maybe, but also maybe we've tried to do Ethereum sidechains on Bitcoin and they haven't really taken off because you can already do a swap from BTC to ETH. And so if you want to go do ETH stuff, you just go do ETH stuff on Ethereum. And that's where all of the market is and all the liquidity is. And you're not going to be able to just like ship all of that liquidity over here. And so this doesn't actually end up causing a real MEV problem for Bitcoin.
Yeah, is this like, are you at all hinting at drive chains right now? Like, I don't know if you are, but it's an example. But is that sort of your would you say that that's your thought about drive chains mainly as well? Like, if people want to do that stuff, they'll just already go do it on Ethereum. Like, this is how I feel. Like, it's like I can go do that on Ethereum right now. Like, you don't need to ship drive chains.
A thing I told Eric a while ago was like, if
he
we had
drive chains, or he did.
Yeah, I don't, and like I don't for two reasons. So like one reason is like, so you need 50% of the hash rate plus one block in order to do a withdrawal. But it turns out you only need 25% of the hash rate plus one block to block any withdrawal. So if you have a quarter of the hash rate, you can prevent any withdrawal you want indefinitely. So
and two pools already have that, right?
Two pools already have that. Yeah. So this idea that like, oh yeah, we're going to do like the Zcash sidechain and have like perfect privacy on that sidechain. Like, no, you're not, because the treasury is going to go to Foundry and say, do not process any withdrawals from the super privacy sidechain. Done. Kills the sidechain. So that's like one reason. And then the other reason is just like economic. Like, I think if we had drive chains tomorrow, tomorrow's Friday. So Saturday, somebody would launch a better version of WBTC that looked and smelled exactly like WBTC, but just had a better custodial footprint. And that would be the only drive chain that anybody would ever use, because they would say like, all of the crazy stuff that I can't do on Bitcoin are all Ethereum things that I want to go do. So I'm just going to swap to drive chain WBTC and go do them on Ethereum. And then I'm going to come back over the drive chain bridge, and that's it. Like, nobody would actually build the Ethereum drive chain because like it's unnecessary. You just replace WBTC with something that's mediated by hash rate escrow instead of by BitGo. And like that's what people would build.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like, this is kind of interesting. Like, if the idea with Bitcoin development has been, like we'll see what's going on elsewhere, like what you were talking about with ZK, and saying like the development elsewhere is incredible. Like, these people are really making progress, and this was moon math, and a lot of this has been financed by these degens. So like, maybe, sort of a utilitarian approach or whatever is like, this has been worth it. And I think that if the idea has been to observe these other ecosystems, see what happens there, and ultimately bring it to Bitcoin if we find it useful. One of the things about drive chains that I think Shinobi has articulated very well, I don't know how well this has resonated with some drive chain people, but like this idea of miners first of all, probably being the ones to run the side chains, and then just including the transactions in their blocks. Like, we are witnessing this right now in Ethereum with integrated searcher builders, right? There's all these searchers who are looking for all these transactions, and they would send them to the builder who would build the optimal block. Well, the builders realize, why are we bidding? Why are we paying these searchers when we can do this?
When I can just do it for free.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I can get a few top level engineers to do this, 100%. And we'll be good to go. And now we can just accept all the transactions we want. And like, this is something where I'm like, guys, like, it's happening there. Like, it's literally happening right now. You can watch what's going on. Like, you can watch the economies of scale that Beaver builds, like the biggest builder, and rsync, like these big block builders on Ethereum. You can watch what is occurring in practice. Like, there aren't these like long tail searchers really anymore. And so I think that was one thing where I was like, yeah, I mean, like, let Ethereum let's at least let Ethereum figure that out before 100%. Doing it, like, because if there's, like, they haven't figured that out. Okay. Well, do you have anything else? I feel like, did you get to talk about CAT enough? I mean, can you show CAT a little bit more for us, maybe? I mean, you're working on it a lot right now. Let me ask, like, I have a question. Like, let me ask. So have you I listened to Andrew Polster talk about CAT. A lot of this is over my head, technically, to be honest, sure. Like, but I think one thing that's interesting about CAT is,
smart. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I think that. Yeah. I think everybody agrees on it. There's like a few people like Greg Maxwell, Andrew Polstra, Peter Wheeler, Matt Corral. Like, these are all people who are like, okay, like, undeniably very, very bright in the Bitcoin space. So like, when they talk, we listen. But he was saying, like, look, CAT's something interesting because it's one of these things, maybe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's like, it could sort of like be the final. Maybe you said this too. It could be kind of like the final covenant because it like opens up maybe a lot of dexterity. What are your thoughts on that? Like, could this be like the big covenant? It was sort of like if we were to find like a ZK proving system that we really like, because Bitcoin sort of demands the best tech. Is this like the big covenant in your mind, or not yet? I mean, you're still hacking away.
I think it would actually be the opposite. So like, I think the reason to do CAT would be because it would be the first, but explicitly not the last. Because like, the way that you do covenants with CAT is and like, I'll give the really short version. And then if you want to get into details, like, I've been living and breathing it, so I can tell you as much as you want. But but like, basically, what you do is, Taproot gave us Schnorr signatures, and like, the way that Schnorr signatures are constructed, if you use a special value for some of the parameters of the Schnorr signature, then you can construct a Schnorr signature whose value ends up being effectively like the hash of a bunch of the transaction data plus one. So what that means is, you could, if you have CAT, because CAT just lets you take two elements and stick them together. If you have CAT, then what you can do is on the stack, because like, Bitcoin script is a stack machine. So you've got a stack of elements, and then all of the Bitcoin opcodes are just instructions to let you manipulate the stack and like evaluate them, right? Like check if things are equal to each other or if the signature is valid. What you can basically do is you could say, all right, I'm going to put all of these elements of the transaction into my script, into my smart contract. And then I'm going to validate, like, yep, my outputs look the way that they're supposed to. I'm sending money to the right address, or I'm sending the right amount, or it's coming from the right input, or whatever. You do validation on it, and then you glue all of these pieces together using CAT, and then you construct this special Schnorr signature out of it, and then you use the normal Bitcoin check sig operation, like signature validation. And what it'll do is it'll check if this signature that you've put together is valid for the current transaction that you're executing inside of. So this gives us a very roundabout way of doing introspection, where you can like evaluate if particular inputs or outputs, or if the shape of the transaction is what it's supposed to be. And so that gives us covenants. Like, you can say, like this transaction's only valid if the coins are going to this address, or this transaction's only valid if I have 3 outputs and the last one is an op return, whatever. So you can do covenants this way, but it is super clunky because you are literally like building up transaction data on the stack, hashing it, creating a specially formed signature out of it, which involves like tagged hashes and the secp generator point being put in there a bunch of places. And then you call check sig. And if it works, then like you're good. So this is not like the covenant that anybody actually wants, but because it's so general, you can emulate all this other stuff. So the theory that Andrew Polstra and a few other people have articulated is like, we don't know if the market demand is for CTV or if it's for something else or if it's for something that doesn't exist yet. So if we had CAT, people could build like, inefficient but functioning emulations of like other stuff.
Oh, okay. So I misunderstood. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And so like if enough people are doing that, then we say like, oh, wow, a third of the blockchain is using like this construction. Why don't we do a soft fork that's like an optimized version of that thing? Right. So it's like a Swiss Army knife.
Okay. So OPCAT plus checksig from stack plus 64-bit. This is from Post Capone, as you can imagine. Is saying that this can emulate global state contracts, two-way pegs, chain swaps, dexes. Would you agree with this? I'm throwing stuff at you now. Like, are we getting into full expressivity here?
Maybe not. So like what you can't do with CAT on its own is like what you want to be able to do is say checksig from stack. So you want to be able to like get an arbitrary blob of data and a signature and a pub key and like validate it. Can't really do that. What that would let you do is it would let you have like authorizations over things other than the current signature or the current transaction. I really want that because I think it would let you do some interesting like transaction cut through where you say like, I've got a bunch of payments that I've done off chain. I want to be able to put all their signatures in a transaction witness and validate that they're all valid signatures, like sort of themselves. And if imagine you and I have some UTXO and we like do a bunch of payments off chain and then I show up and I've got like a bunch of receipts that are signed by you, then you could have the script validate that like, yep, these are all valid receipts and they add up to the right number. So therefore you get to take this money. That's the kind of thing that I think this is useful for. The reason why you need 64-bit arithmetic is Bitcoin script only lets you do 32-bit arithmetic and Bitcoin amounts are 64 bits. So you can't actually like add up or subtract like Bitcoin amounts in Bitcoin script. And that makes it really hard to do like introspection. Like I'm working on a vault right now in OpCat and I can't actually check that like 2 output amounts add up to what they're supposed to unless you're doing under, I think it's like 40 Bitcoin. So 64-bit arithmetic would be awesome. Yeah, I don't know. Like, does it enable dexes and all this other stuff? Like maybe, but to the conversation that we had earlier, like I haven't seen people write this stuff in script yet. So I don't know what it would actually look like. There's a guy named Barack who wrote a dex. It's like a Uniswap competitor. Yeah. It's called BitMatrix. Yeah, he wrote that on Liquid, and it uses.
It's actually like very similar to. It's actually like quite similar to Uniswap, isn't it? It's like a liquidity pool. Yeah. Okay. I've never used it, but
yeah, it's like so. You should look at it because what's interesting is it uses CAT, checksig from stack, and then also Liquid has opcodes for looking at the type of the asset that's coming in because like Liquid has first class support for like issuing shitcoins. So if you're doing a DEX, you need to like know like, oh, like thing 1 is Tether and thing 2 is Bitcoin, right? We don't have that, right? And so like you would need some other way of introspecting your runes or whatever and saying like, oh yeah, I'm trading Tether for dick butt coin or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Like maybe it could enable all of the things. Maybe not. I'm learning a lot from trying to build a vault on CAT that like some stuff is easier than I thought it would be and some stuff is harder than I thought it would be. So I kind of feel like until I see the code, I'm like skeptical of claims.
Yeah, I want to ask you quickly. was it Blockstream's working on, is it called Simplicity?
Yeah.
They've been working on this forever, right? Like 3-4 years. Yeah. Like this is, well, first of all, what is Simplicity? It's like, it's a language that's supposed to enable like more expressivity on Bitcoin. Is this like script? I mean, you're gonna have to.
What's crazy is Simplicity actually like is a new scripting system, so it would replace script.
Okay, yes. Yeah. Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So like it's not like a new language that compiles down to script. This would actually be like replacing the script interpreter with a new scripting system. And the heart of Simplicity is I'm going to make up the number, but it's like the right order of magnitude. There's like 7 like super low level combinators. So it's like these 7 like little primitives that like, add 2 things together, or it's an or. It's like these very like fundamental like building block operations, but they are composable in ways that you can still do like formal reasoning about them, and which means that you can do it like statically, like in a compiler. So the idea is that it's this like super low level like building block languages that you can compose bigger things out of, but then still have machine generated proofs that like it's spendable. Here's how much it'll cost. It's satisfiable. It doesn't have side effects. So like you can like, because like one things with Bitcoin script is like I wrote this huge complicated script for my vault. The only way that I know it works is by like testing it and staring at it. What you'd like to be able to do is have a compiler that says like, here's all the ways that this can be spent, and there's no other side effects. And so Simplicity gives you that. And so the idea is that you could build any script you want out of Simplicity and get like machine checkable proofs that it does exactly what you want and like no more than what you want. And you can build like really complex things out of it. So like you can build Schnorr signatures out of Simplicity primitives. But then, that would be really inefficient, and that would be like a heavy validation cost on all these nodes. So there's this idea of what's called a jet, where for like commonly used primitives, we have pre-compiled versions in C++. And so in your Simplicity code, you say like, I want to do a Schnorr signature, and it just like calls out to the C++ and does it. So some people think that Simplicity would be like the end of all soft fork drama. I think what would actually happen is the new soft fork drama is what jets are standardized and available. Like that's where the soft fork drama goes. The thing that I think is the bigger risk is that like, Taproot was a huge change to Bitcoin that like changed the guts of how Bitcoin transactions work. Simplicity is like more complicated than that. Like the change set is huge. It adds a whole new scripting system. People are already apprehensive about adding CTV, which like the PR for CTV fits on the back of a napkin. Like building consensus around Simplicity, I don't know if it'll ever happen. Like it might just be a step too far.
Yeah, I think that has been sort of that's been what I have inferred regarding Simplicity, and I know it's been a work in progress. Okay, I want to ask you. I just thought I want to ask you one last question. In terms, you can sort of run with this however you want, but it's just like kind of an overarching question here. When we're talking about all this change to Bitcoin, like what are there parts of Bitcoin that you think are unalienable? Like what can we not change? I saw this question one time asked on what is this like very Stacker News, or is it Stacker News?
Yeah, Stacker News.
I saw somebody ask this question. I was like, oh, this should be so very obvious. And I started thinking about this. I was like, this is actually a fascinating question. Like I think I'll give you one for me is like the 21 million. I think this is unalienable. Like personally, I think tail emissions is just, it's never going to happen.
Never happen.
Peter Talk and write about it. It's interesting.
Yeah, but tail emissions will never happen.
Yeah, the tail emissions to me, like I think it's never going to happen. I think it'll fail before that, and if it fails, it fails. Like honestly, I'm much more of the opinion that if nobody will mine Bitcoin anymore, then so be it. Like we tried. You can't have a hard cap, at least probably not in this way. So, but like that to me is one example of something that I'm like, okay, when we're talking about changes to Bitcoin, this is something that like I would say no, that's no longer Bitcoin. What in your mind are just properties of Bitcoin that if we maybe just like screwed it up too much would make it like no longer Bitcoin to you? Have you thought about this?
A little bit. So I think the 21 million hard cap is a good one, and I would agree with that. Like when Peter was talking about like tail emissions, he talked about either tail emissions or demurrage. I think demurrage is actually a really interesting idea. I don't think it would ever happen, but it's one of those things where like I kind of want to implement it as troll software just to like get people thinking. Like I don't think it'll ever actually happen.
Make sure that people understand Demorage. Demorage is like taking old coins and giving them to miners. Is that sort of the essence?
Yeah, I mean, like the way that
like shipping.
The way that I would implement it is imagine if the minimum fee rate to get into a block was dependent on the age of the coin. So older coins were more expensive to spend. Like one way that you could interpret that, and like I'm not saying this is like the right interpretation, but I think it's a reasonable interpretation, is it's a storage fee. Because if you think about it,
yes,
like
okay, this is where it comes from.
People think about like digital gold, right? Okay, if Bitcoin is digital gold, it doesn't really align economic incentives if you pay a mining fee once up front and then like future nodes and miners have to like deal with that without capturing any of the value. It would make more sense if over time, like if you have a UTXO that's like 10 years old, I'm not saying that we should do this. I'm just like playing it out, right? If we ended up in a world where nobody's using Bitcoin transactionally, people are only using Bitcoin for storage of wealth,
right?
Then you could imagine the economic incentives being such that miners say, if you want to move a 10-year-old UTXO, it costs more because like you haven't been paying transaction fees for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm not saying that like people should do this, but I think that like that's the direction that incentives start going if people aren't using Bitcoin transactionally. Like if the market says the use case for Bitcoin is long-term storage, then it doesn't make sense for miners to charge per transaction. It makes sense for miners to charge for storage. Right. I don't think that would ever actually happen because
we're going to have enough fees.
I think we're going to have enough fees, but also like a lot of the memes that drive Bitcoin adoption are like, it's unseizable, unalienable stuff. And like people don't like paying property taxes. Like Michael Saylor's like, your property gets taxed away from you. If miners started effectively charging property tax for Bitcoin, I think people would use a different system. So I think that would actually kill Bitcoin. Like it would kill demand. But it's something that like the change to do that would actually be really small. And I could imagine incentives lining up to do it. I think the things that are inalienable though are 21 million hard cap. I think there's just this idea that like the only people that can spend coins are people that can satisfy the script. That sounds really trivial, but like BSV actually added a system. I wrote a whole thread about it like last year. They added a system where if the theory is like if my coins were stolen, I could go and get like a court order to like freeze those coins, and then there's actually like a confiscation API. And the way that this works in the BSV node software is like if the coins are marked as confiscated, then if you make a transaction that uses them as an input, then the transaction is automatically valid. So like that's a scenario where there's a group of people that basically have a button that they can push that lets them bypass script validation to spend coins. That's like an unalienable thing, right? Like,
bad.
It's super bad. It's super bad. Like if something like that ever came to Bitcoin, and like you can imagine the drive to do it would be somebody says like, oh, in order to get this next wave of ETF adoption, we have to make sure that the ETFs can like get their money back if it's stolen. So therefore we need to have like some mechanism to do this. Like, no, that kills Bitcoin. Like nobody ever uses Bitcoin ever again.
Yeah.
I think beyond that, like, I think there's not a lot, because like at the end of the day, Bitcoin's only valuable if people want to use it. And so if there's other changes to Bitcoin that people like need to make in order to make Bitcoin usable, I think that there's going to be trade-off discussions, but I don't think anything else is like really off the table.
Yeah. I've thought like maybe it's very hard to articulate because I certainly can't define it specifically, but something with regards to proof of work. And
oh yeah, that's actually a good one. Yeah.
I don't really think I wouldn't say proof of work. That's not what I would say, because what I would say is I would say that it needs to resemble commodity money in some capacity. And I think right now, the way we know to do this is with proof of work, and it's probably it's very intuitive and it's worked for a long time. So it makes a lot of sense. We have this difficulty adjustment that is catered to proof of work, right? Like we move the marginal cost of production towards some limit every 2 weeks, and like this ultimately keeps it in theory. I mean, like, look, people like I don't know. I feel like this isn't talked enough about, but like this is like one of the key aspects of decentralization, right? Like somebody will always mine Bitcoin at some cost around the world if they have cheap enough energy, right? Like so. But ironically, I can't think of exactly how to say that in the context of
So you know what it is. So yeah, the Bitcoin miners. It's a dynamic and permissionless set, and I think that it's important that it's permissionless because like one of the things that I think is a reasonable criticism of proof of stake is that you need the existing stakers to process your transaction in order to join the validation set. And like that makes sense for some systems. I don't think it makes sense for commodity money. The other thing that I think is interesting is that, you know, if you think about it from the perspective of like, you turn on a new node, you don't have any of the history of the network, and you get two competing chain tips from your peers. So like you like competing things. You want to be able to establish as cheaply as possible which one of those is the valid or the longest chain. And one of the things that's difficult with a system, and like, I don't want to beat up on proof of stake like that much, but like one of the things that's difficult with proof of stake is that the validity of each block depends on prior contract state, right? Because like you say, like, oh, this block has enough signatures. How do you know that they're valid signatures? You have to be able to validate prior contract state in order to know that the set of signers for that block is valid. So like the cost for like a newly booted node to determine in chain validity is actually like really, really high in that system, in a way that like with proof of work, yes, you do need to be able to do enough validation to know that there has been like double spending happening of like UTXOs. But for validating like that a block header has enough work, you just like count zeros, right? It's like very cheap.
It's like the heaviest chain rule, or like
heaviest chain is like super easy to validate. And then like the property there beyond it being permissionless is that in order to like get a share, right? Because like the way to think about proof of work or any of these things is that it's a decentralized like lottery, and the winner is so it's like what you're doing is you're doing leader election, like you're electing who gets to write the next block, and you're doing that in a decentralized and permissionless lottery. And so in order to gain a lottery ticket, you have to spend a resource that has no value if you don't win the lottery. And so anytime people talk about like proof of useful work, like let's do proof of work, but have you like train neural networks. That's bad, because if you lose the lottery, you still get to like sell your proof of work. I think like the closest system I've seen to the proof of work that we have with hashing is actually what like Chia does. So Chia has this thing called proof of space time. Yeah. And it's basically, they took proof of work, but they made the time memory trade-off of, they said like, you pre-compute all the hashes, you have to store them, and then you're proving that you're storing all of this otherwise worthless data. So the thing that you're burning irrevocably is the use of disk space. I think that system has like other issues, but yeah, I mean, I tend to exist. Like I tend to agree. Like if we got rid of proof of work, we would need to replace it with something that had the same properties around like burning a useful resource and not getting something for it. And it has to be permissionless. I've heard some of the filter crowd say like, we should do mempool relay filtering, and then if miners don't implement it, then we're going to go and change proof of work to a new algorithm. Like, I don't know if they're going to pick scrypt or what they're going to do. That's insane to me. Like I could imagine a scenario in the future where we change proof of work algorithms, but that is such an expensive change because you're lighting a huge part of the ecosystem on fire that I don't think the economic majority is going to light all of our POW on fire over something small and trivial. It has to be like, oh, there's an existential threat to Bitcoin. Like somebody broke SHA-256. So we have to move to Argon 2 or some shit. Like it has to be something like that.
Yeah. I just want to ask you one quick question about something you said. You said that like that the longest chain and like in Ethereum, what is the terminology for this? I remember reading like a paper like about how you need to do like what you were talking about, like much more validation, whereas in Bitcoin you can just go with the heaviest chain. It's like it's not long range attack, is it? It's something else. I forget who wrote about this originally, but it's exactly what you're talking about. But Vitalik pushed back on this one time, and I've sort of it's kind of intuitively makes sense what he said, which is like, look, like at the end of the day, like when you go and download Bitcoin Core, like you go to bitcoin.org or whatever and download Core. Like, what is an example of where that would be like really bad? Like where we could not like, because in my head I'm like, okay, yeah, like maybe you want to go with the heaviest chain, like that's the most, like it's very easy because the network can go offline and come right back. Could come back on? You can just go with the heaviest chain. But like in my mind, I'm like, okay, when does that actually play any role?
Well, so with Bitcoin specifically, right? There's like a bunch of different ways to bootstrap a Bitcoin node. So if you just like go and download Bitcoin Core from the website, and you launch it, by default it runs in a mode called assume valid. Where there's sort of this like I don't know, threshold, right? There's a block height, and it downloads all of the old blocks, but up until that block height, it doesn't actually check any of the scripts or signatures. So it still validates that like, the Coinbase reward is correct. Like no miner created coins that they weren't allowed to. It still validates that like all the inputs and outputs on the transactions like make sense. There's no like inflation happening. It still validates that like every input was like an unspent output. So like nobody's double spending coins, but it doesn't do like signature checking. So you're already kind of trusting like by default. And like you can turn that off. You go into your config file, you say assume valid equals 0, and it will check every signature from the Genesis block.
Eric did this. I think Eric did this from assume valid equals. Yeah.
And so, but like by default, you have this, I don't want to like the word checkpoint might be triggering, but you kind of have this like soft checkpoint of like, look, the likelihood that there's an alternate chain of equal weight that diverged from our chain a year ago that like people are mining on that has invalid signatures behind it is like very unlikely. That's like very unlikely. You can turn it off if you want. There's also a feature called Assume UTXO that recently got merged, where the idea is like when you download Bitcoin Core and you boot it up, you have to wait until the chain like downloads and validates before you can like receive money, and that kind of sucks. So what you can do with Assume UTXO is you can like download a snapshot of the UTXO set, load that, start receiving money, but then in the background asynchronously it does like the full sync, so you kind of get the best of both worlds. I think the difference though between to the thing that Vitalik said, and I think I read this blog post that he wrote, but it was a while ago. Like I think the argument that he was making is like we do have finality checkpoints in Ethereum periodically. And so if you wanted to do a long range attack, if your long range attack started on the other side of one of those checkpoints, then it's not going to be effective because the network is going to like force synchronization at those checkpoints. I think the difference between that model and Bitcoin, there's a couple. One of them is that Bitcoin doesn't have hard checkpoints the way that like Ethereum does for like finality. Like even with the assume valid thing, it's trivial to turn off, and like a lot of people do. And it's there as like a performance optimization. It's not there as a declaration of finality. And so I think like the concern would be if we start trusting those checkpoints more, then like that becomes the place that you attack, because you say like, all right, I'm going to go and provide alternate chain state or what, like, I don't know exactly what the attack is, but like the thing that's important is that in Bitcoin right now, those checkpoints that we have are there to, optimize node bootstrapping, but like they aren't part of the protocol where the protocol assumes that they're correct.
Got it. That makes sense.
Maybe hand wave. Like,
Yeah, well, that exactly. Like, I kind of like take the same approach because I was kind of like, because Vitalik was like, you like wherever you boot up a node from on any blockchain, you're probably going to go online when you're trusting, you're trusting, and I'm like, yeah, actually, like that kind of makes sense. So I mean, I always wondered where, I know, because I always wondered, like where we draw lines, and I'm like, I mean, I don't know about that either.
It's also kind of hard, right? Because I feel like a lot of this stuff is like, Bitcoin is $1 trillion asset. Some of these attacks like don't really make sense at this scale, and so I think like some of the adversary
attacking.
Yeah,
I was going to say like the state attacking Bitcoin by spitting up millions of ASICs. Like that's I don't think will ever happen.
My
it's just
crazy
not how they would do it.
Yeah, I mean, like my crazy heterodox view is if the state actually wanted to attack Bitcoin, the two ways that they would do it would be to set the tax treatment to have it be taxed like digital gold, and to write books like the Bitcoin Standard, and to do lots of podcasts and blog posts about how you should never spend your Bitcoin. You should hold on to it forever and never spend it. And just like the number will go up indefinitely, because, you know, the state is not afraid of gold. The state would be afraid of actual digital currency that people used every day online across borders. And so like if you wanted to attack Bitcoin, you wouldn't try to wage a 51% attack and drive up network hash rate. You would convince people to never spend their Bitcoin. That would be a much more effective attack.
I think that's a really good spot to end. I think that's a very powerful message. Thank you so much for coming on. I thought it was awesome. It's all over the place, but many such cases with my podcast. So thanks, Rijndael. I'm going to go ahead and end it right here.
Cool.